Thank you for choosing the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. I am the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. This is my podcast, and we are going to continue today with our hate reading series. And today, we're going to continue that with Jane Roberts. It's interesting. I lost track. I lost count of how many of these I'd actually read. So that's a good problem to have, and I'm glad for that. Real quickly, I need to make sure, man, they don't give me a lot of behind the scenes control over my stuff. So let me make sure that I have the right mic turned on and all of that. La la. Yep. I probably should, but I don't tag my stuff. Okay, that didn't give me access. Well, I'll just have to hope that the correct mic is plugged in. I don't even know. It's not giving me a good indicator that I'm getting any sound at all, so I don't know. That stresses me out. Give me a moment. I'm sorry that you have to deal with these at the beginning of so many of these, and then I am not really sorry that I'm not going to edit them. Today, we're going to continue with Jane Roberts, and I have a little bit of meta text that I'm going to continue providing for you. Okay, perfect. I'm audible. We're going to continue reading Ghosts in the Middle Ages, and we're going to read some more of William James' actual work today. So I don't have any build-up for you. I didn't put up my screen, so we're just going to deal with that. There's always something that I make. There's always some little minor mistake I make when I get started with these, but c'est la vie. We're going to continue reading. We're going to continue today. We're going to start with William James, because what I want to do, as always, is I want to leave you time between the things that I read that aren't Jane Roberts to think about what I've read, so that you don't. One thing that I've noticed, I do a lot of spaces now, and in those spaces, what I've been doing is on Twitter. Follow me at Shaggy Philosopher. Anyway, one of the things that I've been doing is I've been getting my friends and then strangers and then my acquaintances and people that I think might be interesting to talk. I get them talking for my amusement. And then I poke and I prod that little conversation until everybody wants to separate. And one of the things that I've noticed is that if you don't directly respond to something that you don't necessarily like that someone said, if you indirectly respond to it, or if you let someone else directly respond to it, you will tend to find that the thing that you didn't like about it was actually your fault. It was something that you misunderstood. So if you take time, you give yourself space from it to just let life continue after that thing that mildly upset you. And then now we're talking about what actually happens to me when I read Jane Roberts. So in the same way that I want to give myself space before I jump right into Jane Roberts, I've given myself 4 hours here to do this. So I do plan to chew a lot of the scenery that I forgot to put up. And I might get up and fix that if I don't like looking at it long enough. But the point is, in the same way that I'm doing this and chewing the scenery and talking to you and letting you get a better feel for what I'm like through exposure, I'm also putting off doing Jane Roberts. So there's a certain amount of I'm lazy. I don't want to do things I don't like doing. And then there's also a certain amount of, I see people pop in, I see people pop out, and I do see that my Cash App doesn't get that, hey, fun show, here's a buck, thanks. Um, and that my Patreon doesn't get those, hey, fun show, subscription, I'll keep an eye on what you're doing in this way. So I do know without looking at my analytics that the notification bell isn't being clicked. And these aren't things I'm going to tell you to do. These are things that I'm telling you that I know aren't happening, right? And so they're because they're not happening, they're not incentivizing me to do the thing that you want. And so last night I spent 3 hours on Twitter with a guy that I just disagree with, fundamentally disagree with. I don't think that his ideas can work. I don't think he's personally close to getting where he wants to be with his ideas, but I can recognize in him something in me. That's called humanity. Beauty is, in fact, what I call that. Seeing something of yourself in somebody else is to recognize the beauty in them. And I can see that he is stuck where I was stuck when I was 25 because the ideas that he's working on are a dead end. And no one's ever pushed back on him forthrightly in a good faith manner. And so I'm not going to explain what all this means because you have access to all of my YouTube videos where I explain my fundamental worldview bit by bit, piece by piece over about a 6-month period, and you can watch it happen. You can watch me experience other things I hate in my hate play of Sea of Stars. You don't even need to know what Sea of Stars is. You can see other things that I'm interested in, ways that my outlets can express themselves in what may seem random to you, and things like my big four of JRPGs video, things like this. And the way I want to bring this back to what I was talking to with the guy on Twitter last night, and why I find it interesting, and why I want to talk about it, why I'm still thinking about it, and why, in a way, I want to apologize for it to people who are going to think that maybe I did something that I shouldn't have done by talking with someone that I disagree with and allowing them to expound as far as they were prepared to expound their material. People who might think that that's a bad thing or a mistake, I do want to apologize. I do want to explain without saying I'm sorry, and also without declaring to you that I'm going to change my behavior, because I am going to do that. There is a utility in doing that, not just for me, but for you. You can see where dead ends are. And so this needs to pivot in a specific way, but because of my head injury, I don't remember exactly where that direction is. Time between ideas so you can really soak them in and know what you're saying before you react to somebody is always useful, is what I'm saying. Ultimately, getting back to that wasn't a mess. It was beautiful. Um, might take me some time because I haven't thought about everything that I wanted to say about that. Especially, I haven't thought about it to the point of obsession where I can say it without wheeling around myself and having to explain why I'm explaining it in real time. And this has been a pretty good introduction to what's happened to me in the last, whatever it's been, fewer 22 hours, something like that. Okay, so now I've explained to you why I want to read William James, and then I want to read Ghosts, and then I want to read Jane, and then I want to go back to just talking to my friends about their interests and what makes them tick, and then getting other people to push back on them. My point was sort of that without him ever getting any amount of pushback, he was never going to grow and he was never going to be better. And I remember a time in my life where all I got was pushback. And so I was never allowed to grow because I was never also allowed to succeed. And so it's not maybe a win to you for me, and maybe it's not, but he got a win last night, even if it doesn't manifest into multiple follows and multiple publishing deals. He got a win in that he was able to push himself one step further than he'd ever been pushed before, and he was able to tell himself for just a brief moment that he was safe to do it. And that's a big deal. So join me on my spaces. Join me here in the live. Talk to me in the chat. I'm still a cagey weirdo, but I'm getting comfortable enough on Twitter that I'm letting strangers come in and say, "Hey." It rarely amounts to anything. They you'd be surprised how many people want to talk and just don't realize that they don't have anything to say until you let them talk. And until very recently, that has never felt like my responsibility, and now it's beginning to feel like it's my actual space. Like that's what I give to people. So come talk to me, say you're racist, Nazi nonsense, and we'll see if we can find a common ground in how what you're saying could be better. Okay, we're going to pick up in the middle of section 2 of William James. Does consciousness exist? Quoting James here. If the reader will take his own experiences, he will see what I mean. Let him begin with a perceptual experience, the presentation, so called, of a physical object. His actual field of vision, the room he sits in, with the book he is reading as its center. And let him, for the present, treat this complex object in the common sense way as being really what it seems to be, namely, a collection of physical things cut out from an environing world of other physical things with which these physical things have actual or potential relations. Now, at the same time, it is just, those self same things which his mind, as we say, perceives. And the whole philosophy of perception from Democritus's time downwards has just been one long wrangle over the paradox that what is evidently one reality should be in two places at once, both in outer space and in a person's mind. And here I do want to agree with him that this whole dialectic dualism of whether you have an actual mind body problem is what he's talking about. Representative theories of perception avoid the logical paradox, but on the other hand, they violate the reader's sense of life, which knows no intervening mental image but seems to see the room and the book immediately just as they physically exist. And this is why a lot of my friends who don't know Platonism, who only know of Platonism through scientific Christianity, get so upset over materialism is because they don't even know that there ever was an alternative. And so, what he's talking about is the realist alternative to materialism in 1906, before the atom bomb made materialism the only answer that actually makes any real sense. The puzzle, he continues, of how the one identical room can be in two places is at bottom just the puzzle of how one identical point can be on two lines. It can, if it be situated at their intersection, and similarly, if the pure experience of the room were a place of intersection of two processes, which connected it with different groups of associates respectively, it could be counted twice over as belonging to either group and spoken of loosely as existing in two places, although it would remain all the time a numerically single thing. And you don't need to know what that means, but what I want you to know is whenever you read things like that, whenever you read or whenever you hear me say William James say things like this, I want you to replace the lines, the words that you don't know, with Jungian sounding words that you do know. And now you can know where the Jungian sounding words you do know came from. If not Jung, if not somebody just aping Jung, it was Jung himself just replacing the words in this lecture to fill out books. Well, William James says, the experience is a member of diverse processes that can be followed away from it along entirely different lines. The one self identical thing has so many relations to the rest of experience that you can take it in disparate systems of association and treat it as belonging with opposite contexts. In one of these contexts, it is your field of consciousness, and another, it is the room in which you sit, and it enters both contexts in its wholeness, giving no pretext for being said to attach itself to consciousness by one of its parts or aspects, and to our reality by another. What are the two processes now into which the room experience simultaneously enters in this way? And again, you don't need to understand what he's talking. I want you to get a feel for the cadence of what he's saying, because most of what he's saying is just circle jerk nonsense. He's mostly just fluffing himself for an audience because that's what the essay medium is. It's just bragging about how succinctly you can say things. One of them is the reader's personal biography, William James continues, the actual William James. The other is the history of the house of which the room is part. The presentation, the experience, the that, in short, for until we have decided what it is, it must be a mere that, is the last term in a train of sensations, emotions, decisions, movements, classifications, expectations, etc., ending in the present and the first term in a series of inner operations expanding into the future on the reader's part. Now, I want to double down on you do not need to understand any of this. I don't want you to try to understand any of this because what happens, I'm not telling you that you have a lesser mind because I don't believe that you have a lesser mind. But what happens is that people with your mind and a lesser understanding of their own inadequacies will read this. They'll write it down for themselves where they don't understand. They'll argue with it. They'll write it, they'll rewrite it until they think they understand it, and then they'll plagiarize it for their own book. So I was listening to a guy talk about how he had a friend who takes every book he reads. So he ends up only reading one or two or three books a year. And he does that thing that I showed you I did with Andrea Parent, except he doesn't do it in the way I did. What he does is he takes every sentence and rewrites it in his own words so that he has the entire book rewritten in his own words at the end. He can publish that. He can try. He will get smacked with plagiarism because he didn't do the research, which is the work. And so if you listen to that space, and Kerm, if you're listening to this now, there is something interesting to be said for people who have a university bias, unlike you and I, who genuinely think that, well, wait a minute, because the argument that I was waiting for Khan to make last night, but I wasn't going to make for him, not because I don't agree with him, but because it was his chance to argue his point. And if he doesn't know this, I'd given him enough back credit to fill in what he knew from that. And I wasn't going to let him cold read off of me to say this part. But there's a certain amount of academe where if you grow up with a university bias, that is, you grow up around people with university degrees, you grow up around academics, you grow up with a bias that you are going to grow up to be an academic, you have this idea that academe in its own right is labor. You have this idea that the reason, like, I'm yelling at Jane Roberts, and I'm going to go back to yelling at Jane Roberts when we move a little bit further forward in this. What I'm upset about with her is that she's obviously, in my opinion, um, advanced farming. She's obviously just writing just enough to keep getting her advances from her publisher, but then her books aren't selling. And so her publisher is like, "Well, if you're going to live off your advances, you have to write more books." And so she's in this situation where she needs like I needed. She needs a production line. She needs to be out in front of her audience a lot. Sorry, the hat is uncomfortable for me today. She needs to be out in front of her audience a lot, and the only way she can do that is if she does what she's doing. She's plagiarizing William James, and the way you can plagiarize William James without plagiarizing William James is if your production partner on your podcast, or in this case in your channeling book business, is actually reading or has a pre-existing interest in the people whose work you're stealing, whose not just intellectual property but actual intellect, people whose consciousness you're stealing. And so, as William James is sitting here telling you that there's maybe no mind body problem at all, if Jane Roberts didn't read this, Robert Roberts, her husband, read this and he said, "Oh, well, this means that you're allowed to grift." This means that everything's real. There is no mind body problem. Minds are able to be disassociated from bodies, no problem. And they run with it. And if you watch the space last night, and I am encouraging you to be, what's the word where you're cross platform in your consumption of my material. I highly encourage, if you're going to watch these lives, that you watch the spaces and that you get on the Patreon. Help me take the actually, I'm going to talk to my business partners about that. But help me take the better parts of what you want to be participating in the group chats that I'm in on Twitter to my Patreon. Let's get big group chats started there where you guys can fuck around about philosophy in the way that everybody seems to think that the book club is. That's awesome that you think that's what it's about, but it's only about that because I'm in there. So come find me where I'm at instead of always making me find you where you are, because I'm going to interrupt your life. I'm going to always be interrupting your life. Even doing this at 6 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. is interrupting your life. The more I compromise myself to try to meet you, to try to make this easy for you, the more you have no reason, no incentive in your own right to incentivize me to continue. So my point is, I'm going to read that sentence again, but what William James is telling you is that there is no mind body problem, but that doesn't mean that you get to go around stealing people's conscious efforts, their work, just because there's no evidence that the labor of writing and the effort to actually do the research are in fact what the advance and what the royalties and what the money generated is about. And so that's what I was trying to say. If you have a college bias, if you have a university bias, he asked the question, my acquaintance. I call a lot of people friend who aren't actually my friends, but acquaintance. My acquaintance. I've only known him for 2 days. His name's Conlon on Twitter, and you don't have to like him. He's an anarchist and anti-capitalist. So he and I are fundamentally opposed in just those principles alone. I'm on the record for people saying that people like that have brain damage. And so if he didn't take the time to get to know me between our two podcasts to know that, and I did tell him that, that's on him, and that's what I'm talking about. The research is where the money is made for two reasons. The books actually sell when they're actually right and they're actually filled with information that a literate audience hasn't already been given before. I see what I'm doing wrong. You know what? Let me talk to you about why the books sell, and I see what's going on. They sell because they have good information in them. So if you're familiar with Tom Holland, the reason that Tom Holland can write about difficult subjects that people maybe wouldn't read other people write about, the reason he can do that is because he's right, because he's done the research, he's taken the time, and what people understand is that the royalties are paid so you can take the time. So you can take the time necessary to do the thing right the first time. So you don't have to end up writing update sequels, because that's what happened in the 20th century. So in the 19th century, you didn't have this problem. First of all, you didn't have this many writers. You just didn't have that many literate people. And by that, I mean, you didn't have as many people reading, and you didn't have as many people writing in the 19th century. But in the 20th century, because, especially in the United States, of public education, which was an institution begun in the United States in the 19th century, because in the 20th century, education blew up so big. Everyone was educated, everyone was literate. Hey, Kerm, everyone was educated, everyone was literate. And so more people, a broader section of society, thought they were allowed to participate in what was going on. And so what happened is that Conlon thinks that he's allowed to participate because he is allowed to participate, but what he doesn't understand is that he's participating 200 years ago. And so time has moved on in a major way without him. And that's okay. that it's moved on without him. He'll figure that out. But what he wouldn't argue is that, well, I have a university bias, and my university bias is that these professors have tenure and sit around and get paid to do research. But what he doesn't want to express is that he doesn't really understand the difference in acquiring knowledge because you need that knowledge in order to participate, and acquiring knowledge because you need that knowledge in order to educate. Those are very different things. Educators get paid the way educators get paid because acquiring, organizing, processing, and then presenting all of that information is a frankly impossible fucking task. I've been asked by my Patreon. I'm gonna throw a fucking temper tantrum. I've been asked by my Patreon audience to put on a lecture series like somebody who's organized and knows what the fuck he's doing. And it was a challenge to get organized and know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm gonna tell you right now, that's the hardest shit I've ever done in my life, and fuck both of you for even suggesting it. But also thank you for suggesting it. It's the hardest shit in the universe. So I'm just gonna persevering through adversity, folks. We're going to go back. It's actually easier than doing these hate reads. So I'm going to go back to reading William James. I'm going to go back to reading something completely incomprehensible. One of them is the reader's personal biography. The other is the history of the house of which the room is part. The presentation, the experience, the that, in short, for until we have decided what it is, it must be a mere that, is the last term in a train of sensations, emotions, decisions, movements, classifications, expectations, etc., ending in the present and the first term in a series of inner operations extending into the future on the reader's part. And that's just an incomprehensible sentence to me. I'm not going to try to pull it apart. But you know what? I do that thing. I do that. There must be some there, and I do some there's nothing to that, or there's not nothing to that. And I do that. There's a that to that. I do that all the time. I don't know if that's a philosopher thing. I don't know if it's that I picked it up from old guys who talked like old philosophers. I don't know where that came from, but that's in the way that I behave. That's called your lexicon. Continuing. On the other hand, the very same that is the terminus ad quem, don't know what that means, of a lot of previous physical operations: carpentering, papering, furnishing, warming, etc., and the terminus a quo of a lot of future ones. I keep trying to say furniture ones, in which it will be concerned when undergoing the destiny of a physical room. The physical and the mental operations form curiously incompatible groups. As a room, the experience has occupied that spot and had that environment for 30 years. And again, because Kerm hasn't heard me say this yet, you don't need to understand this. I don't frankly understand what the fuck he's saying, and I don't care to. I'm just reading it to get to something that sounds interesting, and then we'll move to the next thing. As your field of consciousness, it may never have existed until now. And so, okay, he's talking about fields and field theory before fields and field theory were anywhere approaching what you're thinking about when you read that. He is absolutely not talking about relativity or special relativity. He absolutely cannot be thinking about relativity and special relativity in 1906. When he's talking about fields, he's being significantly more vague than that. As a room, he continues, attention will go on to discover endless new details in it. As your mental state merely, few new ones will emerge under attention's eye. As a room, it will take an earthquake or a gang of men, and in any case, a certain amount of time to destroy it. As your subjective state, the closing of your eyes or any instantaneous play of your fancy will suffice. In the real world, fire will consume it. In your mind, you can let fire play over it without effect. As an outer object, you must pay so much a month to inhabit it. As an inner content, you may occupy it for any length of time rent free. None of this matters. William James is fluffing himself. He's just filling words. I've already read that. He states outright in his first paragraph that the entire idea of consciousness as it arrived in 1906 was utter bullshit. I'm reading this for two reasons. So you get the feel for what William James is like, and so you can get a feel for what Jane Roberts is getting utterly wrong. That's it. If, in short, you follow it in the mental direction, William James continues, taking it along with events of personal biography solely, all sorts of things are true of which are what the fuck? All sorts of things are true of it which are false, and false of it which are true if you treat it as a real thing experienced, follow it in the physical direction, and relate to it associates in the outer world. 3. So far, all seems plain sailing, but my thesis will probably grow less plausible to the reader when I pass from percepts to concepts, or from the case of things presented to that of things remote. I believe, nevertheless, that here also the same law holds good. If we take conceptual manifolds or memories or fancies, they also are in their first intention mere bits of pure experience, and as such are single that's, which act in one context as objects and in another context figure as mental states. Okay, that mental states is language that we recognize from the last episode, my last reading of Jane Roberts. We can remember her talking about mental states. And so she said that she'd only read some of one of his book. And I'm telling you right now that as we move forward into this and as it gets more and more difficult for Jane to do this, she's going to find it more and more difficult not to have Robert, her husband and effectively producer, he takes the written notes that become the book. That's with Seth. She made that claim that he's not involved with William James. So whatever, maybe he's not involved in that directly with William James. She says she sits down on the typewriter and then it just comes out. So I'm telling you right now that he's feeding her lines. He's feeding her quotes. He's feeding her ideas. He's feeding her things that William James has said, and then she's getting upset with them and she's arguing them out with herself very badly. And so we're going to continue with William James from part 3 of Does Consciousness Really Exist? If we take conceptual manifolds or memories or fancies, they also are in their first intention mere bits of pure experience, and as such are single that's, which act in one context as objects and in another context figure as mental states. By taking them in their first intention, I mean ignoring their relation to possible perceptual experiences with which they may be connected, which they may lead to and terminate in, and which then they may be supposed to represent. And this is almost all nonsense. I'm not trying to parse out this language. I don't really want you to parse out this language. I want you to get a flow for it. It doesn't mean much. Taking them in this way first, we confine the problem to a world merely thought of and not directly felt or seen. This world, just like the world of percepts, like perceptual worlds, just all of that is, he's talking about the imaginary. He's talking about everything that you can imagine can be real to a certain degree. But what we know is that everything you imagine can't be real. It can only be real to a shrinkingly, a vanishingly asymptotic degree, because we split the atom 50 years after he wrote this, or whenever it was, 40 years after. So he's wrong. We find that any bit of it which we may cut out as an example, he continues, is connected with distinct groups of associates, just as our perceptual experiences are, that these associates link themselves with it by different relations, and that one forms the inner history of a person, while the other acts as an impersonal objective world, either spatial and temporal, or else merely logical or mathematical, or otherwise ideal. And now, if you remember what we've been talking about in the previous, where am I? I'm on 7, right? If we remember what Jane has been writing to us in the previous 6, she's been telling us that what we believe about ourselves is more real than what people think about us. It's more real than what people say about us, and it's more real than what we actually produce for ourselves. And so what he's saying is that that's only true of a very small percentage of people. And here he's saying that those people are very, 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 very stupid. The first obstacle, he continues, on the part of the reader to seeing that these non-perceptual experiences have objectively or objectivity as well as subjectivity will probably be due to the intrusion into his mind of percepts, that third group of associates with which the non perceptual experiences have relations, and which as a whole they represent, standing to them as thoughts to things. And the reason he's saying that the people who believe the things that he's describing are stupid in exactly the way he's doing, without saying, hey, if you believe Jane Roberts, hey, if you believe these charlatanical people telling you what Plato told you is just true without Aristotle, and not to read Aristotle because Aristotle criticizes Plato. The reason he's calling these people stupid in this language is because they won't know he's calling them stupid. They'll think that he's taking them seriously and just move on with their lives. This important function of non-perceptual experiences complicates the question and confesses it, William James continued in 1906. For, so used are we to treat percepts as the sole genuine realities that, unless we keep them out of the discussion, we tend altogether to overlook the objectivity that lies in non-perceptual experiences by themselves. We treat them, knowing percepts as they do, as through and through subjective, and say that they are wholly constituted of the stuff called consciousness, using this term now for a kind of entity after the fashion which I am seeking to refute. I really, really needed you to read that paragraph at some point. What William James is telling you is that the idea of disembodied consciousnesses that can become entities, that can speak to you, that can take over your body, all of that is bullshit. None of it's possible, is what he's saying. Because the definition of consciousness that comes down to us is not the one that they're using. They've changed it radically to arrive at the conclusions that they want to conclude. That's bad. That's not just bad logic, that's bad science, it's bad faith. Starting at the end and arriving your way there is just bad. It's not good for you. That's why the journey is always the destination, right? Because if you're like, I mean, even think about your family vacations. When dad is like, all right, we have to hit A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then get the fuck home. It's always a shit time. Dad's always stressed the fuck out. Mom's crying the whole time. It's always like that. It's always been like that. These shamans that gave us these wonderful idiom, they knew what the fuck they were talking about, because your family was decidedly not the first family that they'd talked to. And so in that way, when you sit down with me in spaces and we really get going at it, you're not the first person I've talked to about this stuff. And if you are the first person, I'm going to tell you, I don't know what the fuck we're talking about. Teach me. Actually, like, try to educate me. And then I'm not going to pay you because, yeah, I'm a shifty grifter too. Abstracting, then, he continues, from percepts altogether, what I maintain is that any single non perceptual experience tends to get counted twice over, which is fact. You want to know why the 2008 market crash happened? It's because they were counting their banknotes twice and counting the second one as pure profit. Just as a perceptual experience does, figuring in one context as an object or field of objects, and another as a state of mind. And all this without the least internal self diremption on its own part into consciousness and content. And that's the thing, is that the bankers in 2008 genuinely believed that those derivatives, those imaginary bets on things in people's minds, had consciousness and life of their own. They became extremely superstitious about them. I mean, fuck, too big to fail is just one big religious superstition. The invisible hand of the market, just one big invisible superstition. It's untestable whether there's an invisible hand that guides the market. That's completely untestable, unscientific, magical thinking. He continues, it is all consciousness in one taking, and in the other, all content. So it's all either made the fuck up or it's all consciousness. And this is how Jung and this is how New Age came to the conclusion that, yeah, it's just all consciousness. But what he's telling you is that he's read the esoteric stuff, and it's either all the esoteric stuff or it's all the materialist stuff. There's actually no place in between. You can't get a material worldview from the esoteric. You can't get to hard stuff like this from Plato's cave. You just can't. You can't arrive there. But then you can't arrive at a spiritual universe with a God that you can react with from Aristotle. You can't do that. So it's either all or of one or all of the other, because there's no unifying dualism. Dualisms don't. Okay, think about marriages of opposites. What actually happens when the parents have entirely opposite personalities, entirely opposite life goals, and entirely opposite intentions for the children? What happens? The parent with the most social strength, the most power within the relationship to go outside the relationship, always raises the child in opposition of the parent. And this is where you get of the opposite parent. This is where you get the Oedipal complex. And so what he's doing right now is he's saying that the Oedipal complex is civilizational, it's not genetic. That's what this paragraph is telling you. Abstracting then from percepts altogether. Percepts are bullshit. And what he's saying is that abstracting from percepts is just from a perception. Percept is what you think, you feel, you believe. And so he's not saying that the way we decide it, the way we describe it today is we would say, well, beginning at what you feel kind of leaves you looking like an asshole, or like, well, however, Kerm would say it in a much more hurtful and colorful way than I've ever learned how to say it. And so continue. Abstracting then from percepts altogether, what I maintain is that any single non-perceptual experience tends to get counted twice over, just as perceptual experience does, figuring in one context as an object or field of objects and another as a state of mind. And so that's true. And so what you're going to hear, what you're going to find from me from a lot of this is you're going to find me going, yeah, William James is on it right now, because what he's saying is that the Platonic worldview, this feelings equal thoughts equal reality, is counting any perception twice. It's counting what happened, how you perceived it, and then counting again what you imagined could have happened and how you feel about that in your decision making. And that doesn't make any fucking sense. You didn't have the experience twice. Even when I talk about ghost stuff with people, they'll tell you that the ghost, the UFO, the supernatural experience tries to force you into that experience. And it only becomes uncanny and weird when you think about it and you try to give it second weight. You try to account for it twice. We can talk with Kerm about that someday. And all this, he continues with, William James continues, without the least internal self, diremption, on its own part, I don't know what diremption means, on its own part into consciousness and content. It is all consciousness in one taking, and in the other all content. I find this objectivity of non-perceptual experiences, this complete parallelism and point of reality between the presently felt and the remotely thought, so well set forth in a page of Münsterberger's Grundgefüge that I will quote it as it stands. He quotes now, I may only think of my objects, yet in my living thought they stand before me exactly as perceived objects would do, no matter how different the two ways of apprehending them may be in their genesis. The book here lying on the table before me and the book in the next room of which I think and which I mean to get are both in the same sense given realities for me, realities which I acknowledge and of which I take account. And I just want to take a moment right now. I just want to take a moment right now. I'm going to look at you directly. I know you guys don't like it when I do that. Somebody always drops out after I do that. And I just want to tell you right now, this guy, Mr. Munsterberg, yep, that's his name. He's a Professor Munsterberg, is a fucking idiot. He continues, if you agree that the perceptual object is not an idea within me, but that percept and thing, as indistinguishably one, are really experienced there outside, you ought not to believe that the merely thought of object is hid away inside of the thinking object. The object of which I think and of which existence I take cognizance without letting it now work upon my senses occupies its definite place in the outer world as much as does the object which I directly see. And what he's trying to tell me is that when I think of anything that I can't see right now, knowing that it's in the spot that it is, it's guaranteed to be in that spot. So people like Jane Roberts are going to say things like tulpa magic works. So if I just imagine that, let's think of a book that I want to read, right? Okay, so I would really like it if somebody would encourage me to make my Amazon wish list available to the public so that somebody could buy me the alphabet of, I think it's called the Dictionary of Greek Goddesses, I think is what it's called. So now I'm just going to, this is also The Secret. And so this is where this comes from. And so what the authors of The Secret would tell you to do is, well, sit and imagine that book, find a picture of it, know what it looks like, And imagine that that book is on your coffee table until it's just on your coffee table. And then when you go out and buy it one day and you put it on your coffee table in that spot, those two moments in time, the moment when you first imagined it and the moment when you put it there and saw it, are the fucking same moment. And they're full of shit. He's full of shit. This Munsterberg guy, full of shit. That is not how it works. When I think of a can of Mountain Dew, I am not thinking of something more substantial than one of these cans of Mountain Dew here. That's just not how thought and speech work. He's trying to say that the names for things, especially the older names for things, are the true thing themselves. And I literally just left a conversation about linguistics to come and do this, and I'm going to tell you right the fuck now, that's the exact opposite of how it works. The exact opposite of how it works. The name doesn't describe the thing itself. The name describes the action, the abstract around the thing itself, and then the use of the name over time solidifies into what the thing is over definition. But definition is literally the process of carving a statue out of a stone. It takes forever. Takes forever. And so words change a lot. Concepts change a lot. And one of the things that Platonists, especially Neoplatonists, get really fucking wrong because they haven't actually read Plotinus worth a goddamn is beauty. They just don't understand that beauty isn't in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is the first thing. The beauty is the recognition that something needed a fucking name to begin with. That's the beauty. And then the beautifying process is watching the name live its own life. This is why transhumanists, when I talk to transhumanists, they all want to give robots life. And it's just that fucking story. Give me a second, because I didn't mean to be talking about Pygmalion. That's not his name. Is that his name, Kerm? I know you're driving. But the guy that brought his statue to life, that fucking movie with the doll with Kim Cattrall. How did I remember Kim Cattrall's name and not Mannequin? That, I think that's Pygmalion. It doesn't have to be like that. And that's why all these stories exist. And that's why they have such deep and ridiculous antiquity. The longer you stare at that statue, the more likely it is to become a real woman is not fucking real. It's not fucking real. The longer you use the word literally to mean whatever you think literally means doesn't change the fact that it only means having to do with a book. And books are subjective. So it's a subjective, meaningless word. You're allowed to use meaningless words meaninglessly to demonstrate that they're meaningless. And Tax, if you ever listen to this, buddy, I love you. I'm not coming at you. I'm yelling at my granddad. I'm yelling at 25-year-old me, who was a real dickhead about words like literal. Man, I would have climbed. I used to climb up in people's ass about using literally when they meant figuratively. But then you look at how people used it 1,000 years ago, and it's like, oh, okay, that word meant figuratively, because figurative doesn't mean anything either. And so what happens is there's a divide between the common people and the people who go to university. There's a divide between the people who are educated and the people who use the language professionally. And there is a divide between the people who use the language professionally and the people who professionally, academically, and the people who use the language professionally, poetically. And all of that matters because Jane Roberts is not an academic. She's not trained like an academic. She doesn't think like an academic. She doesn't write like an academic. Jane Roberts is a poet, and a bad one. And what she's trying to do is reclaim, because neo-paganism doesn't exist yet, because neo-paganism hasn't needed to solidify in rejection of what she's saying yet. She's saying that the runes and the Norse magic and the Norse, the Seether magic and the mead horn from Odin to his selected poets is open to everyone. And this is something that women just don't want to hear, especially Democrat women who are into spiritualism but aren't into organized religion. They just don't want to fucking hear this, but it's not open to everyone. It's decidedly not open to specifically them. And they don't want to hear that because I sound like I'm gatekeeping. But what the fuck am I gatekeeping? They're in my cult. That's how I know that they're doing this. I don't actually have a cult, by the way. But they're in my proximity, and if you're in my proximity, that's effectively my cult. Thank you for sticking around through that. This has been a rant at this point. Thank you for sticking around between these passages. Um, but if you're that close to me, you're effectively in the cult. And if I know your habits and I know what you're thinking about, it's because you're doing it in my proximity. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so if I'm talking about it back to you, it's because you're in my proximity. Like, where do you think preachers back in the day in the Catholic Church, where do you think they got their sermons from? How do you think you know what they sermonized about? How they knew what to sermonize about? I have a buddy who's really struggling now with trying to put together sermons. And how do you think confession what service, what purpose do you actually think confession served in the community that had stuck around for 2,000 years as a tradition? And it wasn't even invented by Catholics. It was actually invented by the Buddha himself. It was introduced to religion, the idea of confessing to a professional within the religion. That was innovated by the Buddha himself. And where do you think that came from? What do you think the utility was? Well, the preacher knows what the sins are in his community, and he's not going to call anybody out by name because if he's talking about it, everybody knows they're doing it. And so it's the community working together to actually solve the problems within the community. It has a function. It works. It doesn't just have a function. It works. It works really well. Now, you can say in your post-Marxism that it's just guilt and it's just this or it's just that or it's whatever, but they didn't have those concepts before that. You have to invent those concepts in order to have them. So William James continues, or no, I'm sorry. God damn, this is still quoting Munsterberg. So I'm still pissed off at Munsterberg as we move forward, not at you. What is true of the here and the there is also true of the now and the then. I know of the thing which is present and perceived, but I know also of the thing which yesterday was but is no more, and which I only remember. Both can be, both can determine my present conduct. Both are parts of the reality of which I keep account. It is true that of much of the past I am uncertain, just as I am uncertain of much of what is present, if it be but dimly perceived. But the interval of time does not in principle alter my relation to the object, does not transform it from an object known into a mental state. Here he ellipsates. Thank God. I'm not reading all of that. He's dumb. Fuck him. I wonder what William James has to say about it. He says, this certainly is the immediate primary naive or practical way of taking our thought of world. Were there Okay, he says primary, naive, or practical. And what he's saying is this guy's fucking dumb. So what he just said is, yeah, this is the way people think about it when they haven't thought about it. Were there no perceptual world to serve as its reductive in tame sense by being stronger and more genuinely outer, so that the whole merely thought of world seems weak and inner in comparison? And can you see how even in 1906 the words strong and big were still like big and effective words? Like these were still words with like many layers of meaning. And now we go power and strength and we're like, what the fuck are you talking about? What power? What strength? This is a time when a person could just walk up to you and brutalize you, and there was very little you could do about it outside of defending yourself immediately. We're not talking about the kind of police state that we live in today. And Kerm, you know I love the cops. Our world of thought would be the only world and would enjoy complete reality in our belief. This actually happens in our dreams and in our day dreams, so long as percepts do not interrupt them. And there you go. There's where Jane got the idea. And yet, just as the scene room, to go back to our late example, is also a field of consciousness, so the conceived or recollected room is also a state of mind, and the doubling up of the experience has, in both cases, similar grounds. The room thought of, namely, has many thought of couplings with many thought of things. Some of these couplings are inconstant, others are stable. In the reader's personal history, the room occupies a single date. He saw it only once, perhaps a year ago. Of the house's history, none. I don't care. I'm skipping this. I'm skipping the rest of this paragraph. I just don't care. If you care, I'm sorry. Well, Kerm's the only one in here. If he's still here, as subjective, we say that the experience represents as objective. It is represented. Fuck you, man. I hate subjective. Okay, yeah, we're done with that chapter. I'm done with William James. I hate that shit. No, we're not. I'll read 4. I'll try one more time. Were I now to go on to treat of the knowing of perceptual by conceptual experiences, it would again prove to be an affair of external relations. One experience would be the knower, the other the reality known, and I could perfectly well define without the notion of consciousness what the knowing actually and practically amounts to, leading towards namely and terminating in percepts, though a series of transitional experiences which the world supplies. Yeah, fuck you, Bill. It's it's not your fault, Bill. It's not your fault. But I live in the future, and in the future, if we don't have anything to say, we just don't say anything. And if we don't like something and we're going to rag on it, we just rag on it, Bill. It's not your fault that you are so dead. Maybe it is. What if Jane's right and it is his fault that he's so dead? What if he could have hopped bodies while you know what? I'm gonna pull a switcheroo on you because I made you a promise and then I didn't follow through on it. And the last time I did meta narrative, I promised that what I was going to read from was Saintess Teresa of Avila's interior castle. My damn squeaky chair. That's what I did. I promised I was going to read from Teresa of Avila, and then I didn't do it. I ended up read from something else. So I'm going to pivot from what I promised you, and I'm going to give you a surprise. I'm going to read from you from Teresa of Avila and the Secret Castle. We're going to go from a man that I don't particularly like and want to eventually burn all of his work in public. I don't mean that literally, but I might do it literally if you pay me enough. To a woman whose work is highly interesting to me, and that I haven't had a good reason to sit down and really dive into in a critical and interested way. So let's do that. This is Teresa of Avila. This is the interior castle. Do you want me to give you a rundown? I'm not reading all of this, but I'll read some of this. It was originally written in oh goodness. It's harder to do this on Kindle than it is in a paperback. I think this was originally written in the 1300s, to be honest with you. Um yeah, I didn't plan on doing this, so I didn't plan on reading the introduction, and that's okay. I'm good with that. Um This treatise, styled The Interior Castle, was written by Teresa of Jesus, nun of Our Lady of Carmel, for her sisters and daughters, the Discalced Carmelite nuns. I don't know that word. Discalced? I don't know that word. It's also called The Mansions by Saint Teresa. Rarely has obedience laid upon me. I believe this is Teresa now speaking. I don't believe this is an introduction. Rarely is obedience laid upon me so difficult a task as this of writing about prayer. For one reason, because I do not feel that God has given me either the power or the desire for it, besides which, during the last 3 months, I have suffered from noises and a great weakness in my head that have made it painful for me to write even unnecessary business. However, as I know the power obedience has of making things easy which seem impossible, my will submits with a good grace, although nature seems greatly distressed. For God has not given me such a strength as to bear without repugnance the constant struggle against illness, while performing many different duties. May He, who has helped me in other more difficult matters, aid me with His grace in this, for I trust in His mercy. I think I have but little to say that has not already been put forth in my other works written under obedience. In fact, I fear this will be but a repetition of them. I am like a parrot which has learned to talk, only knowing what it has been taught or has heard. It repeats the same thing over and over again. If God wishes me to write anything new, He will teach it me, or bring back to my memory what I have said elsewhere. I should be content even with this, for I am very grateful. I should be glad to be able to recall some of the matters about which people say I have spoken well, lest they should be altogether lost. Let me tell you what, I could repeat that for you. I could tattoo it on my fucking forehead. I should be glad to be able to recall some of the matters about which people say I have spoken well, lest they should be altogether lost. I keep saying that in my spaces. I keep writing it. You guys, if I say something original and you like it, you got to repeat it because I do not remember that I said it. She continues, "If our Lord will not even grant me this, still, if I weary my brains and increase my headache by striving to obey, I shall gain in merit, though my words should be useless to anyone." This is why last night I planned to go for a lot longer, but this is why last night when I just hit my wall and I was tired, I quit. This is why when I do intellectual work, when I write, when I'm reading, I tend to push back my deadlines, and why I am so critical of artists and writers especially who chase the advance instead of the royalties. So I'm going to repeat that. If our Lord will not even grant me this, still, if I weary my brains and increase my headache by striving to obey, I shall gain in merit, though my words should be useless to anyone. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the work of the intellectual, whether intellectual work in its own right, reading the books that I read, writing the things that I write, thinking the things that I think, meditating in the ways that I meditate, sleeping at the times that I sleep, whether these things are all billable hours. And this is where your neo-Marxist or your modern anti-capitalist, they come at it where they say, well, everything is labor, and if labor is just effort over time, then there has to be some way of scaling what you effort at, so that artists and philosophers, even when all they're doing is thinking, are still being paid and still able to survive. And so that's something that does merit thought. I don't know that we're anywhere close to a public that understands any of that well enough for the people thinking about it to educate it, and they can hear what they don't understand. And so what she's saying is that if she increases her headache, because she's sick, she's got this breaking body, right? So if she increases her headache and she makes herself tired so that she just falls asleep on her cot and then wakes up and thinks as hard as she can and then falls asleep in her cot, and she lives like I have for the last 4 years, and what's going to happen is the things that she's writing and the things that she's saying, they're not going to mean anything to anybody. They're only going to be for her. And that really happened to me in a big way. You can look at my Patreon, and in a lot of ways, when people like Teresa, when people like Plato, when philosophers, people like me, they give you maxims, they say, hey, A plus B equals C. You go, but I want to know that. That seems like a part of the enlightenment journey that I need to experience so that I can know it for myself. Because if I don't know it for myself, I can't teach it to my kids. And that's a good point. You're allowed to think that. But here's the thing. If you push yourself to that point and don't know that your produce after that point is going to be garbage for the people who read it, you're just going to produce a whole shitload of garbage. You might end up making a career of garbage. You might be Stephen King. And do you really want to be Stephen King, or do you want Stephen King's money? Because if you want Stephen King's money, there's a better way to get it. There's a much better way to get it than chasing after advances. If our Lord will not even grant me this, still, if I weary my brains and increase my headache by striving to obey, I shall gain in merit. And that merit is other people thinking that at least you're working hard. So you're not helping anybody, but at least you're working hard. And, I can't generate tips off that. I can't generate a Cash App or a Patreon subscription income off of, well, at least you're working hard. So I begin this work on the Feast of the Blessed Trinity, she continues, in the year 1577. There we go, 1500, 16th century. In the convent of St. Joseph of Carmel at Toledo in Spain, where I am living, and I submit all my writings to the judgment of those learned men by whose commands I undertake them. That it will, by the fault of ignorance, not malice, if I say anything contrary to the doctrine of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, may be held as certain. By God's goodness, I am and always shall be faithful to the Church as I have ever been in the past. May He be forever blessed and glorified. Amen. He who bids me write this, tell me that the nuns of these convents of Our Lady of Carmel need someone to solve their difficulties about prayer. He thinks that women understand one another's best. Sorry. He thinks that women understand one another's language best, and that my sister's affection for me would make them pay special attention to my words. Therefore, it is important for me to explain the subject clearly to them. Thus, I am writing only to my sisters, The idea that anyone else could benefit by what I say would be absurd. Our Lord will be doing me a great favor if he enables me to help but one of the nuns to praise him a little better. His Majesty knows well that I have no other aim. If anything is to the point, they will understand that it does not originate from me, and there is no reason to attribute it to me. As with my scant understanding and skill, I could write nothing of the sort unless God, in his mercy, enabled me to do so. And here, if you listen back to the first six, when I talk about Jane Roberts' unbelievable hubris, her unbelievable and just I can't stomach her hubris. At no point has she ever indicated that she's inadequate to the task. She's indicated that she feels inadequate to the task, and somehow that's my fault. But at no point has she said these words that Miss Teresa of Avila, Senorita, maybe Teresa of Avila said here in this book. And it's also very important that when she says two things. Now I'm telling you, there's another subdivision here. We can talk about two ways to approach true art. And what she's doing is true mysticism, true anything. There are two ways to approach truth. And this just goes down your totem pole. You just pick a thing and you want to know, hey, can I approach truth with this? The answer is yes. And that's what she's talking about when she says the people who have indicated to her that they want her to write this book. You can write your book as a gift to your audience, and you can get an advance, and you can get royalties in return for it, or you can write your book for a patron and already have the money and not need not even the money, the way of life, the means of sustaining your living, and not even need to profit off the book. Teresa of Avila doesn't need the profits from selling this book. So she can just approach truth without caring whether she hurts your feelings. Hey, I don't care. Look, I lost somebody. And I'm not going to apologize that I lost somebody for telling them that you have two options. You can do it for free and then hope you get paid in the deep future, or you can do it for free and not give a fuck if you get paid. And yeah, it puts me in a position to look like a hypocrite, but how many times have I actually made it available to you and picked you up individually and said, hey, pay me? The answer is zero. And if you offer me money without just handing it to me, I'm going to tell you no. And if you hand me cash, I'm probably going to give it to someone else as quickly as possible. So now we move on to chapter 1. Teresa says, this chapter treats of the beauty and dignity of our souls and makes a comparison to explain this. The advantage of knowing and understanding this and the favors God grants us is shown, and how prayer is the gate of the spiritual castle. So she gives us a numbered list of the chapters and the plan of the book effectively. So 1, while I was begging our Lord today to speak for me, since I knew not what to say nor how to commence this work which obedience has laid upon me, an idea occurred to me, which I will explain and which will serve as a foundation for that I am about to write. And just for my buddy Tax, if he's listening to this now or in the future, I wanted him to know that today, tonight, tomorrow, all of those used to have a hyphen before the two. 2, I thought of the soul as resembling a castle, formed of a single diamond or a very transparent crystal, and containing many rooms, just as in heaven there are many mansions. If we reflect, sisters, we shall see that the soul of the just man is but a paradise in which God tells us he takes his delight. What, do you imagine, must that dwelling be in which a king so mighty, so wise, and so pure, containing in himself all good, can delight to rest? Nothing can be compared to the great beauty and capabilities of a soul. However keen our intellects may be, they are as unable to comprehend them as to comprehend God. For as he has told us, he created us in his own image and likeness. And there was something here in this that I really wanted to talk about real quickly, just context. The mansion thing. We have mansions all wrong today. The mansion back in her time was a manor house, and everybody in the village lived in it. And then I want to read this at the end because I stopped listening when I started thinking about that. Nothing can be compared to the great beauty and capabilities of a soul. However keen our intellects may be, they are as unable to comprehend soul as to comprehend God. For as he has told us, He created us in his own image and likeness, and this is someone who's read Plotinus and knows what the fuck he was talking about. Plotinus gave us the word intellect. So if you want to talk about intellect and you want to talk about intelligence and you're not reading Plotinus, just shut the actual fuck up with that word. 3. As this is so, we need not tire ourselves by trying to realize all the beauty of this castle. Although being his creatures, there is all the difference between the soul and God that there is between the creator and the creature. The fact that it is made in God's image teaches us how great are its dignity and loveliness. It is no small misfortune and disgrace that, through our own fault, we neither understand our nature nor our origin. And see, this is so beautiful because a lot of what I like this a lot. But a lot of why I like this is because this stuff that I hate from the centuries that follow her, it's reacting to her. And the reason it's reacting to her and the way it is because the people who are doing it, Jane Roberts included, are deeply, deeply, deeply misogynistic. And by that, I don't mean sex crimes. I mean, they just fucking hate that women before them contributed at all. They hate women of the previous era. And I absolutely mean women when I say misogyny of this kind. uh, Mary Wollstonecraft was an horrific misogynist, hated women. Now, just because Simone de Beauvoir was a misandrist, hated men, doesn't mean that she felt any better about women. She hated everybody that wasn't Simone de Beauvoir. Don't kid yourself that anyone in the feminine hierarchy or the feminist hierarchy has ever hated anything but herself and her eldest son. Don't kid yourself. They fucking hate their daughters. Just look at how they treat them. 3. Oh, I started reading 3. Would it not be gross ignorance, my daughters, if, when a man was questioned about his name or country or parents, he could not answer? Stupid as this would be, it is unspeakably more foolish to care to learn nothing of our nature except that we possess bodies, and only to realize vaguely that we have souls. Because people say so, and it's a doctrine of faith. And so she's even tackling. I'm glad I did this because the book I was going to pivot to wasn't going to try to tackle the mind body problem for you. And so what's happening is that 19th century and then uh, 20th century, I got those numbers right, philosophers are directly arguing with Teresa of Avila because she's an amazing mystic who had these experiences, saw these things with her eyes, and then is telling you that they are real and that these are the ways that you can approach them if you think in these ways. And then people came after her and said, well, I see Coke cans in my head, so that Coke can's real. And you can see a Coke can too, and that's the same. But I'm sorry, seeing castles of glass crystalline structures that are fractal and impossible to glimpse is not a Coke can. They're not the same. Rarely do, and this is highlighted, rarely do we reflect upon what gifts our souls may possess, who dwells within them, or how extremely precious they are. Therefore, we do little to preserve their beauty. All our care is concentrated on our bodies, which are but the coarse setting of the diamond or the outer walls of the castle. 4. Let us imagine, as I said, that there are many rooms in this castle, of which some are above, some below, others at the side. In the center, in the very midst of them all, is the principal chamber in which God and the soul hold their most secret intercourse. Think over this comparison very carefully. God grant it may enlighten you about the different kinds of graces he is now pleased to bestow upon the soul. No one can know all about them, much less a person so ignorant as I am. And this is the thing. In the 1500s, you say no one can understand everything there is to know about the mind, the soul, the body, the universe, God. And then in 1906, there are people telling you, oh, yeah, we know it all. So 400 years, fewer than few hundred years, is plenty of time for arrogance to take over a culture and for that culture to burn itself down. We've got about 50 years before we're just all extinct. As far as using the words that we use, the names that we use for the nations and the identities which we occupy today. We're that close to just killing each other and being done with it. The knowledge that such things are possible will console you greatly should our Lord ever grant you any of these favors. I'm sorry that I keep going down into my deep radio voice. People themselves, derived of them, can at least praise him for our great goodness in bestowing them on others.
The thought of heaven and the happiness of the saints does us no harm, but cheers and urges us to win with this joy for ourselves. Nor will it injure us to know that during this exile, God can communicate himself to us loathsome worms. It will rather make us love him for such immense goodness and infinite mercy. See, there's a way to talk about our insignificance compared with the infinite and infinitesimal without it being Cthulhu, without it, there's a way to engage with terror without it being something that's actually going to kill and crush and destroy you. And Magic Shadow and I, we kind of went over that somewhere else the other day. I think it was actually in a space that ended up didn't get recorded, but I said something to someone and typically they wouldn't like it, but they laughed. And I said, "Oh, that was a joy response. You're allowed to have that. You should follow that and say what you were going to say that you then realized you had a joy response to." And Madge got upset with me and pushed back on me. And he goes, "Now you're on the record as saying that laughter is only a terror response." And to which I say, "Yeah, joy is the relief that the terrible thing didn't have any intention of killing you. It had no intention, no interest in hurting you. That's why supernatural experiences are so amazing. The thing goes, have no fear, and you have no fear, and there was nothing to fear the whole time. And so then it becomes amazing. And if you leave that fear and you just go right to the childlike wonder, you can absolutely understand why ET contactees the same as Abram when God came to him, the same as Job when God came to him and said, "Do not turn around." You can understand why certain people just do what the fuck they're told in that spot because it was told to them by something impossible. So you just do it. You just do it. And then you can also see the evil, the flip side of that Jane Roberts is using, that the Hitler Nazis, like there are other Nazis, that Hitler and his Nazis used the mind control part that everybody's so terrified of religion for now. And so what part, like, what happens when you go to a religious gathering, a religious experience, and you realize that there's nothing to actually be afraid of? You have a joy response, and then what? Now you're fucking hooked. And so the thing you are afraid of is the thing that you have nothing to be afraid of, but it's the thing that's going to happen to you. So what are your options? Your option is to live in absolute terror of an imaginary thing. That's what William James was just arguing with that guy about, that guy lives in hubris of this imagined greatness in his mind. And now we've got Saint Teresa 1600 400 years ago telling us, not quite 400 years ago, 350, telling us that there's just nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of because there's nothing up there. There are no words up there. Like there's no abstraction where the words can hurt you. And I need this because Kerm has been reminding me for weeks that sometimes I'll read this stuff and I look at it like it's going to bite me because there's a real fear that I'm going to get this stuff stuck in my brain and I'm not going to be able to put it down. It happened to me once. 6. People may say such things appear impossible, and it is best not to scandalize the weak in faith by speaking about them. Yes. I want to lean into that. Yes. Um, I get a lot of negative pushback because I don't push quite hard enough on people. I don't distinguish myself quite enough so that people know me at a glance. And it's that people say things about God. They describe the ineffable in order to seem impossible so that you don't go after it. So you don't even try to think about it. You go, "Oh, well, that's a really big thought. He can keep it to himself." In fact, and when you come to the conclusion that, yeah, I'm just going to keep this to myself, it's because you keep going around, she says, scandalizing people. But what she means is poking holes and cracking and oftentimes breaking and shattering your friends' worldviews. That's called ego murder. And it's real and serious. And sometimes it can happen many years, decades after the initial injury. But it's your fault. If you're me and you do that to somebody, it is your fault. And so you do have a responsibility to, if you can't put them back together, but to be there with them, right? To be there and to help them move past to the next thing. Because if you can say this and you can survive it, you've survived it, right? And so Nietzsche's full of shit, but the idea of if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger is a specifically psychic experience. If engaging with the devil doesn't kill you, it only makes you stronger. But that doesn't work with the flu. It doesn't work with COVID. People want to apply this to Christian Science. And like, if you've got a broken arm, well, it didn't kill you. It made you stronger. No, it made you weaker. Now your arm was broken. And if it wasn't set and doesn't heal properly, now you're never going to use that arm in the same way twice. Surviving it doesn't make you stronger in that way. This is a fiddly and disingenuous use of the word strength, the word strong. And that's what I was talking about. By the 1900s, they were still using fiddly and irrelevant and useless versions of strength, power. So all this Marxist language that we have today, it's all not only outdated, it was outdated in its own time. It was old English, like with that e at the end, at the time that Marx was using it, because French is a reductive, reactionary, old on purpose language, a regressive language. 5. I feel sure that vexation at thinking that during our life on earth God can bestow these graces on the souls of others shows a want of humility and charity for one's neighbor. For why should we not feel glad at a brother's receiving divine favors, which do not deprive us of our own share? And I got into a space with my buddy Jay, and we talked about that, and he told me that we shouldn't because it doesn't need to be fair. Not everybody gets the same amount of the pie when it comes to divine favors. Sometimes God speaks to you, and he doesn't speak to me, and I just need to suck it up about that. She continues, should we not rather rejoice at his majesty's thus manifesting his greatness wherever he chooses? Yes, in fact, she's right. We should be glad wherever we can see it, because if we can see it, he chose it to be there because we would see it. And we should be glad for that, even if it's not directly benefiting us. Not everything has to be a cost benefit analysis directly for us. Not everything has to directly benefit us. Not everything has to directly benefit me. Sometimes my greatest joys, my truest happiness is when my friends succeed, even at my micro things. I love it when my friends call me up just to tell me, they don't ever call me, but I love it when my friends text me just to tell me how their day's going and that their kid got an A on their test. Or like one of my buddies put out that he missed his kid, his third started school today. And that was my favorite part of my day, reading how frankly lonely and miserable he was. And that sounds awful. It wasn't his lonesomeness and it wasn't his misery. It was how much he loved his kid. That stuff is what fills me with joy. And that stuff is how I choose to see God and beauty. And so you and I have a different relationship to God because you haven't read Plotinus. Kerm, shut up. If you've read Plotinus, you understand God. You understand God. And God is beauty. And when we talk about imagistic and we talk about, well, God made us in his image. Well, his image is beauty. And that bow in beauty is manness. The manliness, the humanity that's in us that didn't start until religion picked up about 7,000 years ago. That, that's beautiful. It's not beautiful objects. It's not the subjectivity of whether it's pretty. It's not whether you want to fuck it or not. It's whether it's timeless. It's whether you look at that and go, that's beautiful. Everybody does that to something, and that means that there's evidence of God because God wouldn't have put that in us if he didn't want us to recognize us around us. And so, if God is our image and we are God's image, recognizing imagistically ourselves in anything that's not us, that's an act of divine worship. Sorry for wearing Madge's hat for a little while, but that's what's happening when you do that. It's a structure in your brain. It doesn't have to be an abstract. It's not all this Platonist bullshit. There's a materialism happening there. When you see something you like and it makes you think, "Oh man, I really like me." And you know what? I like other things that are like me. That's called God. You just aren't God. It's evidence of a God, but it's evidence that you're not him. And that's awesome. That's what it is. Sometimes, she continues, our Lord acts thus solely for the sake of showing his power. As he declared when the apostles questioned whether the blind man whom he cured had been suffering for his own or his parents' sin. So it used to matter whether you were suffering because your parents had done something, because something that we think of, something we think today that generational debt just started like in the 70s with the cessation of the gold standard, that's an anti-capitalist lie.
Familial debt has existed since 5,000 years ago, and that's fine. What's not fine is what used to happen is that kings and monarchs and your autocrats used to every 4 years, they used to cyclically wipe it. That's why we have a 4 year election cycle in the United States, because every 4 years, the debts, the balances, the sheets, all of that used to be wiped all the way up until 1776. From the beginning of history all the way to 1776, you just started over every 4 years. But it has given us a very strange cultural amnesia. They didn't have this cultural amnesia. We have a weird culture. I think it's fiction. I think it honestly is fiction because all of their fictional stories were grounded in a mythical history of their people. So it was grounded in a sort of non-linear dream time, is what I call it. It was in the past of their people. But when you watch like Marvel, you're not watching a past of your people. You're not watching any kind of history. You're watching entire fiction, and that's okay too. I'm not moralizing, I'm not judging. I'm trying to understand what we do different than our ancestors, that we get everything so wrong in ways that our ancestors literally took thousands of years to figure out how to get as wrong as we have. And it's that, I think it's the fiction stuff. Do, not a sponsor. 6. Oh, she said some stuff about Mary Magdalene in here that I didn't actually read. 6. People may say such things appear impossible, and it is best not to scandalize the weak in faith by speaking about them. But it is better that the latter should disbelieve us. This is what I keep telling you. I'm not sorry to keep jumping in on this. I gave myself 4 hours. Chill out. Um, when I tell you that you need to approach this stuff with a mostly closed mind, what she's saying is that it's better. It's better for you, the lived experiencer, to disbelieve everything, especially if it's a really wild claim made by somebody who claims to have been touched by God. She's saying that the 40 years in exile, I'm sorry, the 40 years in the desert, wandering in the desert under Moses' tutelage, she's saying that that wasn't just a punishment. In fact, she's kind of saying that God didn't punish the Israelites with that. She's kind of saying that that 40-year period is how long it took for every single proof of God and of Moses's caliber to lead them was tested, and it wasn't until Moses was found wanting ultimately that they got out. So once Moses was found wanting, they got out, and the only way you do that is if you utterly disbelieve everything anyone making any kind of faith claim makes. So she says it's better that the latter, that is the person who hasn't had a supernatural experience, should disbelieve the supernatural experiencer, than that the supernatural experiencer should desist from enlightening souls which receive these graces, that they may rejoice and may endeavor to love God better for his favors, seeing he, God, is so mighty and so great. And what she means there is that it's better that you ignore me than that I stop, because if I stop, you have no opportunity to hear this stuff. But if you ignore me, you at least aren't taking the opportunity away from anyone else. And this is why I shouldn't do so much of this, but my buddy Kerm, man, he's so right about this. He's so right about this. He says that atheists, and he I need to workshop him on saying it a little bit better, but basically what he tells you is that when you engage with an atheist, what you're trying to do to an atheist, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, but especially if you're a believer and you're speaking to another human, what you're trying to do is you're trying to give that other human the second order observation of God and Jesus and your faith and your belief and your worldview. You're trying to gift that to the person that you're speaking to. And then if you're a forthright human being, you're also trying to gift your second order of observation to the person that you're speaking to. But if you're an atheist, and Kerm's right, what an atheist is doing is when you give your second order of observation to an atheist, they hold you at gunpoint, rob it, and leave you with nothing but fucking suck it up, buttercup. And that sucks. It sucks talking to people like that. I would much rather talk to somebody like Conlon, who may or may not know what the fuck he's talking about, but at least deeply believes it and is trying to share something that he deeply believes, than somebody who's just trying to tell me nuh-uh, and that he's smarter than me because he can come to the conclusion that nuh-uh, well, I can nuh-uh too. That doesn't make me smart. What if everything that I read here, just every paragraph, I went,
okay, so she says, people may say such things appear impossible. And I just went, nuh-uh. And it's best not to scandalize the weak, nuh-uh. In faith by speaking about them, nuh-uh. You would never take me seriously. So why do we take atheists seriously? Why do we take Richard Dawkins seriously? You ever listen to him talk? He never answers a question. All he ever does is go, nuh-uh, and then talk about how little his dick is. Who cares how little your dick is, Rich? There's no danger here, Teresa continues, of shocking those for whom I write. That's irony, because I just talked about Richard Dawkins' dick. By teaching of such matters, for they know and believe that God gives even greater proofs of his love. I don't think I'm doing a very good job of that right now. I am certain that if any one of you doubts the truth of this, she says, God will never allow her to learn it by experience, for he desires that no limit should be set to his work. Therefore, never discredit them because you are not thus led yourselves. She's saying, you're in a nunnery, but that doesn't mean that when you're out in the market, when people come in here to pray, that you shouldn't be speaking the word of God. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're not allowed to speak the word of God. All it means is that you're not encouraged or frankly allowed to lead service on Sunday, but not leading service on Sunday, that comes from the confessional booth. And and the reason it comes from the confessional booth is that the way civilization worked before Buddhism was you just told your mom, and then your mom gossiped with the other women in the community, and then the other women in the community came together in a proto government, and then they killed somebody in a ritual sacrifice, and then the problem solved itself. And so organized religion said maybe we're not going to do that anymore. Maybe what we need are governments where people can go and advocate for themselves in courts. Maybe that's a better way. Maybe killing people in these horrific displays of government power, maybe that's a bad idea. And so, if you really think about your horrific displays of government power, they're always done with cult and religious iconography and ceremony, but never with any cult or religion's blessing. And man, y'all are dropping like flies, and that's fine. Not everybody's ready to be told that female magic ruled the world with a bloody fist for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Not everybody wants to hear it, and frankly, I get it. I wouldn't want to hear that my gender. I don't like hearing that my gender ruled the world with a bloody fist for thousands of years, frankly, because it's not true. But the other reason I don't like hearing it is because lost somebody. Uh, there's this expectation that because some guy who looked marginally like me 1,000 years did some bad thing, I'm inclined genetically to do that thing. Do you understand how stupid that sentence is? Do you understand how stupid the idea that you can pass on traits like violence and cultural hate genetically? Do you know how stupid that is? You can't pass thought through your dick into a woman. It just doesn't work. That's not how babies are made. And so in a lot of ways, this stuff that we're reading, whether it be Teresa, whether it be William James, whether it be Jane Roberts, whether it be Aleister Crowley, it matters that these people believe that if you think a particular thing long and hard enough, it'll make that thing real. Because then you get people like Jack Parsons, who literally thought that he thought a woman real and thought a baby into her womb. Like he really thought, he believed that happened. It didn't, but he believed it. And just because you believe it doesn't make it real. And so there's an idiom that I say a lot that I know gets under people's skin, but people will make a claim that's maybe a little bit outrageous, or maybe people would normally scoff at, and I'll say, no, I'm willing to believe that, or no, I absolutely believe that, or yep, I believe that about you. Like, it seems ironic, it seems aggressive, but what I'm doing is I'm saying, yeah, no, I'm not skeptical about that. I'm not disregarding what you say. I've observed you enough that checks out with what I already pre-existingly believe about you. But there's also a certain amount of people expect to be believed just for having perception. And that can't work. That can't work, and it can't be real. And I'm sorry if you can hear her in the background. She's going to be rude because she doesn't like that I'm finding even a modicum of success. So she's shouting in her bedroom as loud as she can to be heard over my microphone, and that's embarrassing, and there's nothing I can do about it. She's already put me on eviction. I'm going to see her in court on the 16th about her behavior.
So just help me get the fuck out of here if you don't want to hear her stupid voice. I don't have anything more for that. No adult human being should have to live in the amount of disrespect that I cope with from adult human beings for as long as I have had to do it, or at all. You just shouldn't have to put up with the trash that I've put up with in my life. And that's why it's so hard for me to fight through this adversity with these books. That's why it's so hard for me to even get emotionally elevated or get comfortable with being emotionally elevated in public is goddamn, just humans mistreating one another. It really changes you being mistreated over a long period of time. And so I'm pivoting now. We're pivoting to Jane. And I want you thinking about that, what being mistreated for a long time will make you do, the kind of compromises that being mistreated, especially by a member of the opposite gender, will make you make in order to just not be mistreated by that particular person moving forward in life. Jane Roberts is a divorcee. Monday morning, January 7th, 1977, and we're going to flip back like we always do to double check. And she took 2 days. There are 2 days between this and the last chapter for those of you who are taking note. And hey, thank you for that. Hey, Jen, I haven't seen you in a minute. How are you doing? I know you can't answer that, but it's great to see you. I mean, you can't answer it in real time, but it is great to see you. Thank you for stopping by. All right. So this is the ghost now of William James speaking through Jane Roberts' typewriter. It seems sheer idiocy to look there for any of man's redeeming characteristics, and um, I could, for your understanding, go back to the previous paragraph to know what the fuck he's talking about when he uses this there without defining it. But to really bring home how poorly this was edited and written, I'm not going to. It seems sheer idiocy to look there for any of man's redeeming characteristics, for altruism and greed alike were seen as the result of mechanical, repetitive, psychological processes that caused men to act in a given way. Wow, it's so funny. Um, that sentence almost reads exactly like one of the sentences that we read out of Intellect and Consciousness, which suggests to me exactly what I said. She's cribbing that now because she thinks she won't have read it. Predestination was given new biological and scientific clothes. In such a framework, men could not take credit for their achievements or be held responsible for their blunders, and self determination was sorely undermined. Such ideas clashed with all of democracy's stated ideals, yet were held equally with them. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to have to do is on Twitter, we're going to have to do a space, or we can just do a dedicated. If I can get people who actually want to talk together, I'll have to figure out how I can do that. But get a nice group conversation going about self-actualization here, because that self-determination, self-actualization, self-realization, those concepts came before Jane if she's using them as self-evident terms. And so that's something that we're going to have to talk about what that means: self-actualization, self-determination. She's saying that, well, William James is saying that in whatever situation, self-determination is undermined. And I have to wonder if William James was even a fan of self actualization, or whether pragmatism was itself a route to self actualization, because self actualization is that it's that secret of imagining an object in your mind until you buy it and put it in the spot where you imagine it being, and then telling yourself that magic happened. Such ideas clashed with all of democracy's stated ideals, yet were held equally with them. Many of these issues largely escaped me in life, yet I should have sensed their shape more clearly. Had I been more adventuresome, I might have helped tip the balance, or at least I might have pointed out the contradictions between these two opposing areas of thought and philosophy. To this end, I now speak my piece, for the attitudes that finally emerged in the mainstream of American life strongly affected the ways in which individuals viewed themselves and their creativity. Not only was man robbed of true satisfaction with creative work, but he was led to preserve his own doubts and torments, since they were seen as responsible for art's achievement.
Artistic production was tied to a neurotic birth, and the artist in whatever field began to hoard conflicts, imagining that they were the source of his productivity. Okay, okay, Jane. What Jane is saying is that psychologists hate artists and that psychologists are trying to kill the art industry. But Jane, Piss Christ is from the 70s. Like, art as we have it today is all happened in the 70s. I don't like doing this, but I'm actually gonna. Yeah, okay. Piss Christ is even older than or even younger than I thought. Piss Christ is 1987. At no time did psychology, psychoanalysis kill art. William James, I mean, Jane Roberts is making the argument here that that psychology killed art in the period between 1910 and 1976, but 1977 is Star Wars. Are you fucking telling me that psychology prevented Star Wars from being made? What the hell are you talking about? Wow, 4 people showed up right as I said, what the fuck is she talking about? Did psychology prevent Star Wars from being made? I sound like the hugest Star Wars nerd in the world, and I may as well be. She continues, many of these issues largely escape me in life, yet I should have sensed their shape more clearly. Yeah, what she's saying, yeah, they leave immediately after that too. Um, what she's having William James say here is that he never wrote about any of this because he couldn't have written about any of this because it's all happening in the 70s while she's writing about this. He absolutely couldn't have, but he should have. He should have known. He should have been able to track that out. William James should have been a prophet. He should have been able to predict the future. That's what people who make religions do. In Jane Roberts' mind, that's what people who make religions do. So pragmatism should also have oracle. Why doesn't pragmatism, William James' religion, why doesn't it have the ability to do oracle? And so we're going to find out what she says his reason is. Had I been more adventuresome, I might have helped tip the balance. Or at least I might have pointed out the contradictions between these two opposing areas of thought and philosophy. To this end, I now speak my piece. For the attitudes that finally emerged in the mainstream of American life strongly affected the ways in which individuals viewed themselves and their creativity. Not only was man robbed of true satisfaction with creative work, but he was led to preserve his own doubts and torments since they were seen as responsible for art's achievement. Artistic production was tied to a neurotic birth, and the artist in whatever field began to hoard conflicts. That's just so annoying. I wanted to make sure that I had read that correctly, and I see that everybody dropped out. Hey, thanks for staying with me, Jen. And I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars, even if I don't like the story. It's just fun to look at, and more importantly, what it did for narrative fiction, it brought it back to life. It brought the narrative fantasy back to life on the screen. It had totally died by the 1970s. In fact, film was on its way out in the 70s. So, like, if she had written this in the 60s, you could see where she's coming from. But the argument that psychology killed movies doesn't make any sense. It wasn't the psychology that killed movies. It was the old tycoons that were in charge of the movie companies. Then a bunch of movie studios went out of business. The movie studios hired a bunch of young innovative artists like Jane is not at this point in her life, and they just did it differently than it had ever been done before, and voila, here we are. The auteur was born. She's just upset she doesn't get to participate because she's not an auteur. She's not a genius on any level. She actually breaks in to talk directly to us at this point. After getting the previous material Monday morning, Jane says, I took a break, did some house chores, then Rob and I had lunch. I was in the middle of our gourmet feast of soup and peanut buttered crackers when suddenly the James material started up again, very quickly. I kept putting down my soup spoon to take notes. I dropped my cracker in the pea soup. Finally, we just cut short lunch, and I went back to my typewriter. It was a damp day in the 20s, but James was energetic, so to say the least. I felt as if both of us were taking a walk on a brisk, bright autumn day somewhere with him passionately discoursing. Okay, so she did it 3 times, like a triplicate or like a triplet, but she's not a good poet. So doing details in triplet like that is just annoying in prose in the 70s. She tells you 3 times that she's so poor she's eating soup. So she's even doing kind of the thing that I'm doing, where I'm reminding you that I'm poor and I really do need help. I really do need the income. I really do need the shares and the likes and the subscriptions and the yada and the yada and the yada. But she's doing it in a book that she's getting royalties for. That's counting your money twice, is what she's doing. And that's exactly what William James told you she was going to be doing. So he did predict her. She says he didn't predict the future, but he absolutely predicted her and the way she was going to use his words. William James now, death its own pleasures, allowing you to comment and leisure upon your own time. Ooh, that's a spooky line. I mean, sometimes she gets close to writing good stuff, seeing what came before and what after, and judging how many of those future developments you saw or understood in their embryonic form. If in the past genius and madness were considered allied, both were seen in an heroic light in their connections one to the other, and if genius was sometimes tinged with madness, so was insanity tinged with genius. This is so funny. I just called her not a genius, and now she's going to tell us what a genius is. So tell me how you're a genius, Jane. The heights and depths of man's soul were each seen by Freud, however, as the result of infantile behavior patterns that rigidly control man for his lifetime, or don't, or just continue to tell me why Freud sucks. The grandest dimensions of experience reduced to a psychological determinism from which only the deepest self examination could bring redemption. I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone who's a determinist who's also deeply critical, self examinatory. A psychological journey that no one could safely take alone, and one in which the individual was most likely to misread the direction of his own bents, having been taught to scrutinize precisely those spontaneous learnings meant to serve as psychological directional signals. And you know, it's so funny. I just realized the reason she keeps wanting to criticize Freud and kind of stump for or soft sell for Jung is because people have this idea that Jung was a self-starter, that Jung was a self-help writer. They have this idea that Jung wasn't a clinical therapist, he wasn't a clinical psychologist, but Jung was educated and actually went to university for a clinical psychology degree. Jung actually interned to get a medical clinical psychology license. Like Jung was so late in the industrialization, the institutionalization of the psychological sciences that he actually had a medical degree in it. He was trained to be a medical therapist. He was significantly more the problem if you want to talk about clinicians' offices and sitting on couches and wrong-headed people getting inside people's brains and fucking up their problems even worse. Jung is the guy who actually did that. Freud just gave lectures at colleges. Sure, he did a little bit of that. He had an office and all that stuff, but he didn't have licensure. He didn't have a degree in it. Freud made his bones the same way I can't remember his name now, but Freud made his bones on cocaine, folks. Freud had a bunch of patents on cocaine. And you weren't allowed to just be a pharmaceutical tycoon back in the early 1900s, the late 1800s. You also had to be a healer of some sort. So he was a grifter, folks. He had a if you've ever watched Squidbillies. Squidbillies gets it right. And if you're familiar with that SNL sketch, gets it right. What Jung was or if you've if you've watched Arrested Development, gets it right. What Jung was a psychoanal rapist, is what he was. He was none of what people think he is today. None of what we think he is today. He was screwing around inside people's brains in ways that they absolutely could not consent to. And if you look, Jane's not entirely wrong about the psychological establishment in the 1970s. If you look what happened between 1945 and now, what happened was Squidbillies is hilarious. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Jen. What happened was hypnotists, grifter dickheads going around telling women how to behave with their lives. But there's no difference in tarot readers today. All of this bullshit, whether it's Jane Roberts or Mary Wollstonecraft, anything that's written for women, by women, for women, with the intention that men not read it, not comment on it, and if they do, you not listen to them. It's all bullshit. It's all cult bullshit. M. Pickles, I haven't watched that. Let's see, Mr. Pickles, I haven't watched that. I will have to check that out when I'm done with tonight's Spaces. Okay, Continuing on, creativity became no more than enlightened insanity. No, it didn't. And insanity, a distorted creativity. And now we're back to Odin and his horn and this idea that feminists and neo pagans have that I told you was in William James and that I told you was in Teresa of Avila. If you look for it, you'd have to read into it, but it's there. This idea that women somehow have this muse magic. It's a metaphor, people. It's a metaphor. When a guy calls a woman his muse, what he's saying is she's who he likes to fuck when he's not doing the other thing. Like artists are we're simple. We like to eat, we like to do our art, and we like to fuck. That's about all we like. Both creativity and insanity were seen as the inevitable results of conditioning and neurotic cravings over which the individual had little control. Continue to be seen that way. In fact, the better we understand the creative artistic mind, you don't have to like Jordan Peterson to listen talk about this, the more we understand this bias is actually right. Artists are lazy and we're self interested. That's why I keep telling you to pay me and you'll get more of these that are specifically the thing you want. If you don't pay me and you tell me what you want, I'm going to tell you to get fucked. I worked for a corporation for too long. I know how that looks. Protestantism was based upon, William James Ghost continues, man's right to interpret truth for himself on an individual basis, thus directly challenging the authority of the Roman Catholic Church as the only agent capable of such discrimination. What? No, there were Muslims. There was a Jewish situation going on here. She's trying to make the argument that Protestantism's insistence that everybody be allowed access to read the book also meant that everyone has a right to interpret truth. That's pragmatism. That didn't come until pragmatism. That's not what happened with the literacy of Protestantism. They weren't saying that everybody had an opportunity to interpret it. They were saying that everybody had an opportunity to read it. The wars, the nonsense, the heresy that you and obviously Jane Roberts are unaware of from the Protestant era of Christianity are from people interpreting the books in wildly wrong ways. Now, I don't know if Jane Roberts has Mormons in her audience, but she's talking about Mormons. Ah. And upon an attempt to put the individual in a one-to-one relationship with God and the universe, that's not what Protestantism ever wanted to do before the American prosperity cults. In ways, this was a paganistic adventure. Yes, well, yeah, because what she's talking about is neo-paganism, and she's talking about Guy Ballard's "I Am" cult, and she's talking about cult. She's not talking about Orthodox Christianity. She's not talking about anything that's based in the gospel, anything that's based in the books. She's talking about cult and heresy, and those are paganistic in that way, reviving ancient characteristics of religion that had been buried but not lost when, for example, shamanistic genius was used for the community or tribal good. Shamans don't use genius. Genius is actually what women have. Men have Janus. Tell me if I'm wrong about that, Kerm, when you're not driving anymore. But if William James were writing this, he's got his Latin all wrong. He's got his order upside down, and all of this is just wrong. So I need to say again, I highly encourage you to read Jane Roberts for yourself, to buy it, to make sure that her money, in as far as it can, gets to her estate, any of her children, any of that, if it exists. But none of this is real. All of this should be taken not with a grain of salt. All of this needs, you remember, any of you who remember 2005, all of this needs a great big "it's a theory" sticker on every single book that's in circulation. Do you remember how they did that to? They used to do that to uh, evolution books in schools. They used to put a theory. It's just a theory as a sticker on the cover for the creationists at home not to freak the fuck out and actually destroy government property. That's what needs to be done to Jane Roberts. Her estate needs to buy up all of her work and put a disclaimer sticker on it, because this is harmful to your mind if you actually read it credulously. But you should absolutely read it. And if you're a collector of historical works that have anything to do with organizing the history of the way our modern worldview was built, you should have her work. It should be discussed in public. She should be better known. I understand that if look, my friends get at me because I don't want to be sued, and this isn't even about not wanting to get sued. This is very much about, if you want to make a cult, if you want to be Jane Roberts, if you want to be even like me to a certain degree, um, don't just first of all, just don't. And man, you got to put a disclaimer on it. You got to put a disclaimer that this stuff not having a disclaimer on it is harmful to your brain, because you think that because it's on the same bookshelves in the same stores for the same price with the same hardback cover with the same jacket as a legitimate work of scientific history, that they're legitimately the same thing. Because they're in a book and because you read it, it's that effort, that work of reading it is the same kind of work. And I'll tell you right now, I find this significantly more cognitively exhausting than I've ever found Plotinus. And Plotinus is maybe the densest philosopher who ever did the philosophy thing. It's almost impossible to read in English. It's so boring. And I would read that 10 times before I read this a second time. I really don't even remember where I was. She was talking about She's talking about shamanism, and I don't like it when people who clearly don't know what the fuck they're talking about talk about shamanism, because she's so racist. She can't talk about what she knows about shamanism is from fucking Western TV shows when she was a girl. Like what was it called? Howdy something? Like that's she knows it from fucking the Lone Ranger. That's what she knows about fucking shamanism. Freud, and you know how I know she doesn't know anything about shamanism? The fucking books weren't written until the 2000s. The books about shamanism that are even a little good weren't written until this century. It's not until this century that we realize that everything that Joseph Campbell wrote about shamanism is trash. None of it's useful. Everything that Jung wrote about shamanism, he watched while he was watching fucking Bonanza. They just didn't know. They didn't know anything. And you know why they didn't know anything? We were at war with the Native Americans. What anthropologist was hanging out with the Native Americans? And what Native Americans were giving him anything but horse shit? Think about it. We were at war with them. We were killing their people. Why would they tell us anything but lies about themselves? I wouldn't tell you anything but a lie with me if you were trying to kill me. You know, it's really funny. That's actually true about me. When every corporate job I've ever had, whenever I work for a corporation, all of my backstory details, what I'm going to do with my time off, like who I'm dating, who I'm having sex with, all of my gossip-worthy information, it's always lies. And I always pick who I'm going to tell it to. I always lie to different people about specific ways. So when the gossip gets back to me, I'll know who the fuck is telling lies about me and how accurately they're sticking to my telephone story. That's a thing I actually will do. I wouldn't recommend you do it. That's a sociopathic, uh, socially manipulative behavior that I would not suggest you do to people. They don't like it when they realize that's what you've done, especially when you get them fired for it and you point in their face and say, "Fucking knew it, you fucking liar, you fucking pot stirrer, stirring the pot stirring motherfucker." Freud, however, took that Protestant right away. The individual was seen as incapable of knowing his own motives, much less able to interpret his own relationship with nature or the soul. Freudianism was then based upon the less fortunate of Protestantism's concepts while stripping it of its heroic qualities. That's a deeply racist thing to say, that a Jewish person stripped Protestantism of its fortunate qualities, or no, that it gave it, that a Jewish person gave Protestantism something but stripped it of its heroism. That's Nazi horseshit. Like, you hear that, right? That's what Hitler used to say, actually, that the Jews stripped the German people of their heroic quality. This sentence is outright Nazi bullshit. Freud, however, took that Protestant right away. A Jewish man took the Protestants' rights away. This is Nazi horseshit, just right here. Throw this book in the trash. Nowhere was the search for truth considered a natural component of personality. Now, like, you can't have a ghost say Nazi shit and not and then like be like, do the what's his name? The Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, oh my bad about Plato. That's not what happened. You didn't accidentally put Nazism in your book. Like, you can't accidentally say that. Like, you can accidentally hurt a cop's feelings by saying dumb shit about cops without even realizing that you're talking about cops. But you can't accidentally be a Nazi. Like, you can't come to the conclusion that the Nazis had some good ideas, which I have not, without having read their shit. You can't. Wow. This didn't happen either. And I hate this next sentence so much because it's in that book I told you. I don't own a physical or a Kindle copy of it, and I currently just don't have the money to eat 2 meals a day, let alone buy books to read to you guys. But the book is called The Alphabet and the Goddess, and it's about how the writing itself, the process of writing, destroyed women's position in society. And so she's going to say something really fucking stupid here, and I need this to be very clear. I am reading this line. I am not saying this. This is really fucking stupid. The penis replaced the cross. Thus, one half of the species, the more intuitively inclined, was denied redemption. Why is a male ghost saying this? And if the cross was itself in many ways a maligned religious symbol, not in 1906 it wasn't. That didn't happen until the 60s. The malignation of the cross and the what do we do now? I call it's metamodernism, and I call it Howard Zen bleeding heartness. But what would you even call it? The way that students now look at Christopher Columbus and go, "Oh, he was such a bad guy. We should burn down his statues." That didn't start until the 60s. So her bias that that's how people have always thought is because she's mentally retarded. She's just not smart. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Yep, I'm going to get sued for that one. Freudianism replaced the saint and the sinner alike with a mechanical psychological man. No, it didn't. What Freud said is that the normal psychological state seems to be a myth made up by the patient themselves. That's what he said. He said this whole endeavor of trying to make people normal by any means, whether it be by chemicals, pills, therapy, masturbating them in the office, whatever it be, it's a waste of time because they're only unwell because you told them that you could make them well. There's something to that, by the way. I know someone like that. That the more you're like, hey, do better for yourself, the worse they get. Programmed from childhood to fail or succeed. That's true. There are a lot of people that feel that way. She's on to something with that. And this is why Kerm really busts my balls that I look for her to say something meaningful so we can really have a meaningful conversation of what she's saying. But that is right. She here is wrong in that she's referencing the drama of the gifted child. I'm going to do that thing I don't like doing. I don't like the downtime. I don't like knowing that you're looking at my face specifically while I'm typing and can't see what my face looks like, which is a weird pathology on its own. But drama of the Der Giften Children is published. I wish that 79, 2 years after this. So the information that Jane is talking about is in the public milieu. There's no way that this book. See. Oh, I just broke my computer, didn't I? I'm going to say that again. There's no way that Jane is unfamiliar in 19 and the research that's being done around it. The drama of the gifted child, which was originally published in 9. The reason the way is zero is because psychologists don't publish the popular book first. They publish the popular book to the popular audience already after they've gotten the what's it called, peer review necessary to go public. That's when you educate the public. So she's absolutely aware of the drama of the gifted child. Yeah, yeah. Kerm says this is his favorite one because we aren't really reading it. Yeah, I'm mostly talking about anything but reading Jane. She gets so deep under my skin, and she's fitting so much in here that needs to be argued with. It's just wrong. So Freudianism replaced the saint. I've never heard of Freudianism. If you've ever heard of Freudianism, raise your hand in the chat. But I've never heard of Freudianism. Freud was not accepted in his life. He was ridiculed. He was Jewish, and his work was stolen. There's psychoanalysis, but they distance themselves from Freud and prefer to suck at the dick of Carl Jung, which makes them wrong. Freudianism replaced the saint and the sinner alike with a mechanical psychological man, reprogrammed from childhood to fail or succeed. And so what he didn't do is that, but that children are programmed from birth that that children are programmed from birth either to fail or succeed is something that your atheists, your anarchists, and your anti-capitalists really struggle with. Is the idea that it really does seem like certain kids just have great grades all the way through, and no matter how hard you try, you can't match their grades. And so they must just be being programmed by society to succeed in a way that you don't get to participate in. And look, as somebody who was weeded out of university and who has friends who were weeded out of university, that happens. But it's not this. It's not some psychological robot man who's allowed to succeed at civilization. We keep we keep seeing the tech bros, and we keep seeing these pocket civilizations within our own civilization tell us that we're going to have this pocket civilization of a perfect psychological man, but it never happens. All of those people that lead that perfect psychological man cult, they're all rapists, every one of them. Oh, Kerm says that line that I'd never heard before, Freudianism. Am I understanding you, Kerm? He says that he said, "Man, I'd never heard that with the space and the banger," which indicates that he was really surprised that I'd never heard of that. And then, yeah, he's that's an emphatic, not a question. You've never heard of that? I can't like, wow, you really have never heard of that. And then what he says is, "Man, you and I have been in different circles, buddy, because I've heard it to death." So he's heard enough people say Freudianism that it makes him roll his eyes, and I've literally never heard it before. So we roll in different circles. What that means is that he's out with 1970s. I shouldn't say hangs. What I should say is that he has run in circles with 1970s era educated psychologists, which means that Freudianism was a real thing, and that the friction between Jung and Freud maybe is something that we want to look into for next week. The state of Freudian babble, he says. Okay, so that's a real thing. People, why? I'm gonna have to. I can't ask the chat that. If somebody in the chat, like if you just happen across somebody who knows like a lot about the institution of psychology and the way these. I've never looked this up. I thought I had a pretty good grip on it, and I don't. Um, not looked at it. I've never looked deep. I've watched a ton of lecture material, colleges, like whatever. Wow, Freud. Okay, that's cool. I've never heard that before. I'm gonna move on from that. But if you can point me in a direction, or just any one human person that knows this, that would be really cool. That would be really utilitarian of this recording for me. And then so that failed to succeed ends on a semicolon, and he continues. He, she, the ghost continues, and tied man's grandest symbols to their least beneficial manifestation. If religion, as embodied in Protestantism, had failed in large measure, its many denominations did allow for various interpretations. You know what? This is actually interesting. Why is she defending Protestantism so hard? I understand, Kerm. I'm going to read those in a second. I understand the American bias toward Protestantism. I do understand that. And I understand that in the Northeast, you're not going to. No, I don't understand in the Northeast. Rochester, New York, probably has a pretty decent Catholic. That's unimportant. What I'm thinking about has absolutely nothing to do with this book. It has absolutely nothing to do with going on in this book. It has everything to do with my Canadian friends and their idea that when you say Catholic, they mean a specific denomination of Protestantism. And I find that stunningly weird. Understood, Kerm. You and I are the only one in here for that second. So he says that I understood. Okay, hey, welcome back. I'm sorry if my connection is fiddly and it's dropping you guys in and out. There's just nothing I can do about that for now. It's very strange to me that people think that the word Christian means a particular denomination of Protestantism, and they assume that Protestantism means some kind of no. I don't understand. I don't understand this weird bias, this weird. No, I do understand it. I do understand it. I was trying to explain to somebody the other day that anytime you say, anytime you have a maxim, anytime you say, do not do this specific thing, what you're going to have is people leave your group to do that specific thing. Keep everything else except that specific thing. That line gets changed, and that's how you get denomination. That's how you get all of these myriad kinds of Christianity. But I don't understand this whole wanting to be very specific about Protestantism and then wanting to be fiddly about Protestantism. It's Jane's move. I just don't understand why introducing it at all. Why does she need to teach us about how Christianity works besides she needs to prove she can? It's just weird. Um so the educated and illiterate could each find a place. Protestantism didn't do that. Religion did that 5,000 years ago. So too the virgin mother, prostitute, scholar, working man, the child, and the adult. But this isn't true. The 1800s are trying to reduce people to one thing so that women could, so that they were trying to. Feminism is about making sure that certain kinds of people don't even get to participate at all. And one of those kinds of people is Protestants or prostitutes, and the other kind is children. So this group of who the fuck is she talking about? Virgins, mothers, and prostitutes, children, working men, and scholars are the only people who don't get to participate in feminism. So why is she saying that Protestantism tried to allow these people to participate if only so she can say they are not allowed to because of feminism? The fit of the individual into the framework was perhaps a poor one at times, but there was psychic mobility, and the sinner could become the saint. No. Granted, a shallowness ruled. The good person wore decent clothes and modeled a cheerful countenance, but the democracy hoped to provide those opportunities by which the poverty stricken could discover employment. That's just not true. What the democracy and what the education, I'm sorry, what the democracy and what the religion, Protestantism, did was provide people with an education so they could be, so they could, I did, I bet you I did, Kerm. Um, they provided education so you could skip, you only had to be in poverty during your young childhood so that at 16 you could get out of it. Kerm made an impassioned and deliberate plea for that last night, that if you're in poverty and you don't like school, get a part-time job and get your life going now. You can start at 16 without much permature, and you can start much earlier with help from the state. And if you're in a bad situation, the state would much rather help you get a job than put you in foster care. In Freudianism, however, the poor could not help being poor. Due to neurotic conditioning in infancy, their drives forever frozen, immobilized, so that they were robbed, in theory at least, of the self determination allowed to others, as women were. For all of their drives were assigned to a sexual envy of the male that they could not escape. Why is she spending so much time talking about how great Freud is and how much Freud did for women and how wonderful Freud is? And then now, why is she saying that other people attached that Freud thought that women were horny and crazy? That was Freud's core conceit, was that women were horny and crazy because all boys wanted to fuck their moms and kill their dads and had no interest in women who weren't either of those things. That's Freud's whole idea. The effect of all of this was to reproduce the importance of individual creativity, but also to place it in a more suspect light than earlier. and worse, to encourage the artist to keep whatever spiritual or psychic discomfort he had, to forsake understanding, lest, along with his torments, he lose his creativity. Is that true? Are the Grateful Dead trying to stifle their creativity? Their creativity? Piss Christ was in the 1980s. He wasn't stifling his religious feelings for creativity, not even a little bit. If you're not familiar with that, whatever, I don't even think it's art. Since the creative powers always seek fulfillment and are innately curious about the self and all aspects of its reality, the artist was put into a position where he tried to use his creativity and not use it at the same time. Is she trying to talk? Is William James talking about abstract paintings? There's absolutely nothing wrong with horny and crazy. Um, if I sounded like I was moralizing or doing a moral judgment, I didn't mean to. I keep getting myself in trouble for this, for saying things like "Temptation, thy name is Christian woman," but horny just means you're not getting it on the regular, and that's well, like, what's bad about being horny is that you're not getting it on the regular, right? Like, shouldn't, like, biologically, every woman should be getting it on the regular. Maybe not every man, but every woman. You're biologically capable of it every day, but like 3 of the month. No, I know. You asked the question and I'm answering it. Honestly, I know you were being silly. But I keep getting myself into very real trouble with this. I've upset a bunch of my, not close friends, but I've upset a bunch of my female friends by teasing them about being horny, and it's not that I want it. It's not that I want the help. I can't help. I'm too far away and injured. It's that it's this. It's like Jane Roberts is like taking advantage of it by telling you to continue to use the, because women are confused. Women, let me approach it from a different direction. I've been talking about Eastern mysticism with a bunch of my female friends on Twitter, and we get really confused about the self-denial of sexuality. Women were never expected to participate in the self-denial of sexuality to reach enlightenment. Women were never expected to do that. The reason men have to do that, or the reason men are encouraged to deny themselves sexually in order to reach enlightenment, is because there's an actual fluid exchange where you're losing actual bodily nutrients. And if you're also fasting, you're gonna die. You're going to do very real permanent damage to yourself if you're spitting out those very real nutrients. It's a lot of protein and zinc, and you need that stuff. It'll hurt your body long term if you're doing the things that priests and monks are supposed to be doing. You want to be celibate so you're not wasting nutrients. It sounds counterintuitive and it sounds stupid, but it's really about your long-term health. Women kill shit if they're not getting regularly laid, and it does negatively impact a female's psychology in a different way than a man's, because we don't have the cyclical estrus cycle. So for us, it's just this permanent pressing, just do it, and you can ignore that and it can go away. But a woman will never, not until menopause, and then after menopause it's even worse, because now they have no reason not to. It's always good to go. That there's a moralization there that should never have been attached to it. And the biggest part of the moralization happened when during the Peloponnese War, the Greek women of Athens, literally what they did is they withheld sex at every level of civilization until the Athenians ended that war. And so ever since then, every civilization that's ever heard about it has used that. I was watching Patrice O'Neill, and rest in power, Patrice, but he made a joke that really upset everybody in his audience one night when he was talking about, when a woman is mad, the first thing she does is hold the pussy hostage. And it's like, that's kind of a grotesque thing to say to another adult, but it's not a judgment from me. It's not a moralization. It's what happens. And then you frustrate yourselves because you put yourselves in a dead end that you don't want the conclusion of this. You don't actually want to kill the pussy. You understand what I'm saying? Like, you do want the ransom. And so this has been happening for thousands of years. And it's I think fundamentally it's why we build walls, and why men and women ultimately, once we were living close enough together, we needed to, ultimately we segregated because we just couldn't get along long term. not when we're not in the same marriage chamber, so to speak. And we can see it now. The more we try to say that, and it's not even women, the more we try to say that human beings in general, because of equity, have equality or have equality, the more we try to push for this kind of sneering, sarcastic, one eye closed equality. What happens is that 75% of marriages end in divorce. And we're approaching that. We're at 60 or 65%. I was looking even marriages of people in their 50s, people that get married in their 50s, 60% of those marriages end in divorce. So even the marriage contract doesn't even make sense. What are you doing? You're agreeing to monogamous sexual relationships until one of you finds out that you're not. It's a very strange psychological experience, and it's all wrapped up in this book. All of it happened in the time that this book was being written. Tuesday morning, February 8th, 1977. Marriage is the number one cause of divorce. I do agree with Kerm on that. And thank you, Jen, for saying that those were good points. I was kind of speaking directly to you, a woman, during that. And as a man, I do understand that not only do I have to be sensitive, but if I say something even remotely stupid, you won't hear me long enough to laugh at me and tell me while I was wrong. So thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to know that I'm not coming at you. I think women are great because they're different. They're so different. It makes them infinitely fascinating to watch. Tuesday morning, February 8th. Since no one could be trusted to know the motives, this is still James speaking. Since no one could be trusted to know the motives for his own actions, and since the democracy was setting the individual free of strong governmental authority to a new degree, I don't know what history they think that happened, but democracy has never made the government stronger or made the government weaker and more diverse. Government has always made the government Democracy has always made the government bigger and more present in your personal life. My mouth is getting tired from all of the reading, so I'm going to start stuttering a lot more than I have. He says if you say you have to be sensitive, you might not be. Yeah, you're right. And then Jen asks, why would you give your power as an individual or even as a couple over to the church or the government? And when I got married, I found all of that strange. I was talking. I keep referring back to this, but this is more interesting than Jane to me. And I told you I was getting tired, so I was going to start stuttering while I read. I was talking to a guy last night, and he was kind of giving me that same runaround, like, why do you need a church or a government in order to get married? And the church is the point of the church, and why you go to the government or why you go to a courthouse is for the he wanted a psyche eval. You have to have a psyche eval. He wanted everything to be psyche eval this, psyche eval that, everything a psyche eval. And so when I asked him, well, how many psychologists do you think that's going to require, he didn't have an answer. And I think that's why the church at least has enough bodies just standing around with nothing to do that they can at least give you the second order psyche eval of whether your marriage is worth it. Because they do that. There's that section during a Christian marriage where they say anybody who doesn't want this marriage to go through, whatever, speak now or forever hold your peace. And that's there for, like, if somebody in the audience knows that the bride is already unfaithful. It's for moments like that. Like, we have those set up so you can have these, oh, don't get into this situation. I know something you don't know about her. And I was in another conversation on Twitter. There was a you know how drama stuff goes around the internet. There was this guy who played a video of his fiance with another man in her marriage bed, um, over his marriage, like on a projector over the marriage during her vows. And people were saying, why would you do that? That's such a horrible thing to do. Why would you, if you knew it happened, why would you wait till the time of the wedding? And the answer is because if he had canceled the wedding, his father would have had him assassinated. He had to have a very good reason, because marriage is an extremely old tradition, and rich people take it very seriously. Okay. That's a long sentence. In the framework of that very long sentence, exuberance, energy, and creativity were acceptable when channeled into the competitive aura of national interests. That's interesting. because what I want to talk about tonight is whether transhumanism is in fact nationalism. The rich, for example, were absolved from normal behavior and allowed artistic or eccentric activity because their financial interests were considered such a practical investment in national life. That's actually not true. Rich people who participated in eccentric or artistic behavior were always cut off. They were always cut off. If you did anything that could make money as a rich person in public, you were cut off from the riches. Drawing an income at all, doing anything labor related, and that includes doing research and writing books and publishing them for a paid audience. All of that was forbidden to rich people in the time period that she's talking about. So, like, I could borrow a Kerm phrase that I really liked, and I shouldn't because of Conlon. He's going to think I'm the most disingenuous, backstabbing prick in the whole universe. But we can add another thing to the list of things that this William James, the ghost of William James, i.e., Jane Roberts, doesn't know anything about. Ugh. Jeez. And that's rich people. Yet the social and business arenas themselves were unpredictable. A poor immigrant might be tomorrow's millionaire. No. And in such a psychological environment, the old rules of social protocol based upon European class systems could not be counted upon smooth bridges of communication. And now I do begin to understand why, for anybody who gets in and listens to that, Kerm got so upset. I did understand. I get it. But I'm sitting here trying not to be that upset about this just utter fantasy misunderstanding of how economies work. Like, people really think people really think Jane Roberts just told you that she really believes that there's an invisible hand in the market that chooses who gets to be rich and who doesn't get to be rich. So when I keep asking these people, if these tycoons and these people who start businesses that get rich, whether they were chosen to be rich by God, and whether we shouldn't just get the fuck out of their way or not, and they don't have any fucking answers, their answer is yes. They won't look at it, at whether they even believe that, because they keep being atheists. They keep realizing they're atheists until they find this proof of God in their own behavior, this proof of religious behavior in their own religious thinking and their own behavior, and they just won't encounter it. Well, it's back. It's back right here. A poor immigrant might be tomorrow's millionaire. No, he might not be. A poor immigrant only becomes a millionaire if the billionaires decide so. How do we think money works? Where do we think it comes from? Like, I understand that people understand that reductively money is just invented, but the Federal Reserve is the only people allowed to invent money, and they don't just invent money and give it away. They sell it to the government at huge interest. They actually don't sell it, they loan it. If they sold it to the government, it would actually make sense that we have a currency system on money that can be invented by a people and then sold to the government. You could make money and sell it to the government. That's just not how that works. And in such a psychological environment, that is where poor people overnight can become a rich person. The old rules of social protocol based upon European class systems could not be counted upon as smooth bridges of communication. And this is what I keep asking people, is like, who's the arbitrator of social mobility? And nobody seems to know what that idiom social mobility means. Nobody seems familiar with social mobility. And I love that nobody knows what that means, because it means that Jane Roberts and her ilk have so thoroughly won that you don't understand that we're in a hierarchized world. We still live in hierarchy. We still have a class system. There are still poor people. There are still people who make just slightly more than the poor people. There are still people in a bracket, just like we have tax brackets, and your tax bracket is your class. It just is. It always will be, so long as you have tax brackets. And I don't know that you cannot have I don't know that you can't have at least a poverty, a middle, and an upper class. I don't know. I don't even know that it makes sense to break it up into those three. It makes more sense to break it up into me, the regular people, the government, and the religious, but we want to pretend that the religious don't exist. So all we have is this pie, and 66% of it is the government. And that's getting bigger, because when you eat pie, it's delicious to eat the whole thing. Who only wants 66% of a pie if you're allowed to have more than half of it? I'm not going to read that comment out loud. You guys can find that comment on your own. That's too rude for me to say out loud. And I shouldn't even have laughed at it where you could see my face. So we're going to continue with the Ghost of William James says the theory of the independent individual ruled. Yeah, this book needs a great big theory sticker right on it. If she's going to go around throwing around theory in italics and she's going to be sarcastic and she's going to behave like this, yeah, her work needs to be treated with ridicule and scorn. You don't get to be scornful if you haven't already written the peer-reviewed paper, Jane. It's just not how it works. The reason she has to do this scorn is because she's just not allowed to publish the peer-reviewed paper because no one would read it. No one would show up for the peer review, even though it were anonymous. And precisely because of the country's freedom and unpredictable social and economic climate, the countering theories of psychology's norms took pragmatic hold. Yep. So now she's doing what I told you she was definitely doing in the beginning. She's burying William James. She's using William James' ghost to bury William James' life work. So now she just used pragmatic and psychology ironically and sarcastically in the same sentence. She wants you to know that she fucking hates this guy. And as much as she was talking herself into liking him for the writing prompt, today she hates him. Parents, says Jane Roberts, and Kerm, you didn't hear the part where he was talking about liberating children from their parents, but see if that's what she's going to say. She's going to argue the broadly liberal, broadly anarchist, broadly anti-capitalist, because this seems to be who this chapter is for, is those people. Irony of irony, uh, that I would spend 2 days talking to one and then read this particular section, but maybe it's not. Maybe I wanted to give myself some practice before coming back to this. Parents, said William James Ghost, were to blame for offspring's deficiencies of character, even as any of America's problems were seen as resulting from Europe's dark parental heritage. Yet the democracy still envied the old world's rich creative past, so it latched upon Freudian theories, connecting creativity and neurosis, and projected all of its own current tumulus into a source in European cadence or decadence. That's not true. That's not true. William James' own work, Pragmatism in the Meaning of Truth, nope, Varieties of Religious Experience. He says that the creative experience is the psychopathic experience, that you have to go through prolonged suffering in isolation in order to have an artistic impulse, that it is the broken mind that is artistic. He says that outright early in that book. The American saw himself as blazing ahead, and she would use that in scare quotes sarcastically and ironically, hurtfully, in 78, 77, 77. Immediate ancestors had opened up the continent. Now the new frontier was technology or business, the management of the country's resources and the acquisition of wealth. Not in 1906, it wasn't. They were still laying down train tracks in 1906. And as little government control as possible, 1910 for that matter, when James actually died. Robber barons rose in the guise of the good Protestant burgher. Now that's sort of true, but mostly not true. Everybody knew, even in the 1800s, that the tycoons were evil. Everybody knew that. No longer did religion's fear of God's retribution hold sway over men's minds, at least not strongly enough to urge caution, and psychology removed guilt or justified its sting. Guilt had little to do with basic values, therefore justifying crimes committed in the name of competition, since man was considered a confused mixture of primitive drives and needs. Yet those drives had to be leashed and directed towards society's goals. Now, when she says committed in the name of competition, she wants you to know that she doesn't like competition. So I like competition, and so I hate this. I hate this part. In all of this, contemplation of the soul had little place. That's just not true. William James himself called the 19th century a century obsessed with the search for America's soul. Meyer's theories concerning the subliminal self, after making early inroads, vanished from the mainstream of academic and philosophic life. That concept, stressing the interdependence of individual minds and the availability of superior inner knowledge, could have been used to augment democracy's basic principles to far greater advantage. And now here she's speaking directly of her husband, directly from her husband's perspective, and she's speaking directly to the higher cult, the higher thought cult of the 1800s, he was a member of a higher thought cult movement before those two started their doodad, started this evil do that they're doing. And the higher thought cults like I Am and shit, um, Meotis Blackburn, they were trying to infect democracy so that only people who were certified enlightened could run, stressing individual while bolstering its responsibility and power of achievement, and emphasizing its relationship with interweaving natural and social arenas of activity. Some of Meyer's thought was incorporated into the positive thinking schools and cults. These and Freudianism, mutually contradictory theories, showed the opposing poles of American sentiment, and each had roots reaching into Europe's past. I don't know how the power of positive thinking has roots into Europe's past, and I really don't know how the power of positive thinking, except for being a Christian movement, uh, I don't know how it had anything to do with before the 1960s or 70s when that fucking book was written. I don't know how that book could have how that I don't know how that book could have affected the 1800s if it was written in the 1900s. That doesn't make any sense to me. Myers began with the hypothesis that man possessed an inner self of extraordinary creativity and organization, psychology's nearest corollary to the soul, and I really don't know how it's the opposite of Freud. Its directions could be misread, its language was symbolic, but it was of good intent, and using good here is just to keep you from thinking. The Freudian concept of the self lacked any good intent. That is, it was stripped of altruism in any trustworthy or purposeful form. Yeah, he's not Christian, he's Jewish. He doesn't think that humans have an inherent goodness. He thinks you need Jesus in order to get to goodness. It was the only kind, and by that I don't mean a personal relationship with Jesus. I literally mean we need to evolve to become all of us Jesuses. It was the only kind of a self that could logically survive the theories of Darwin, told you, as popularly understood, the end result of an organism that survived by triumphing over other life forms in an endless battle for life. So because she can't say what she's saying, she has to go purple and she has to talk around it. And so what she's telling you is that Freud believed and the higher thought cult believed that by 1978 we would have speciated by then. We would have already the religious would have already speciated to the higher thought, the higher DNA, the higher being, because they were reading dumb books like the Time Traveler, and they thought, oh, fiction, fiction, oh, the Bible's fiction, these are the same process, and they're idiots. That self's one virtue was that it did survive, and if it lost its intuitive feel for nature in the process, well, that was nature's fault. Altruism, displays of valor. Hey, you know what? That line right there was the closest to a masculine line she's ever written. She's getting closer to at least approaching masculine dialogue. Altruism, displays of valor, philosophy itself, or creativity in terms of the arts. These were only possible because of their self serving qualities, and beneath their gentle guise lay the infant's savage determination to exist and the male's drive to slay his father in order to supersede him in life's battle. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for the male to want to do that. Um, it never made sense for Freud to say that it made sense. It only makes sense for the male to want to kill his father if he lives in abuse. If the father is abusive, yeah, you want to kill that father. But if you just have a father, you don't want to kill your father and you don't want to fuck your mother. That's the exact opposite of how biology could possibly work. You have brain structures designed to prevent you from killing your parents and fucking them. It's not something that should be possible. If it's possible, what you have is abnormal psychology. And I'll tell you how this is true without reaching to psychology. Every time I listen to an evolutionary biologist talk about, they will say this exact phrase: life does not care about anything except this one thing I'm about to say. But what I want you to understand is they say the phrase life does not care about. And what they mean is life does care about. And what that means is life is intelligent on its own right. Life makes its own decisions outside of what you want. So, regardless of how much you hate your father, you have to be in an environmental situation to want to hate your father because the only thing life cares about is successfully reproducing its genes. You can't successfully reproduce your genes if, as a teenager, you kill your father and fuck your mother. That's what that Oedipus story is about. It's a warning. It's not a model. Idiots. God damn, the 19th century was so fucking stupid. And you know what's crazy is I just said the 19th century was stupid, but this was written in 1978, 76, 77. I don't know why I can't get that. 6, 7, 8, 7, 8, 9 is the joke I thought I was making. God, I suck. I'm tired. Such theories stripped human personality of any majesty and denied the possibility of heroic action that was not tied to the meanest inner motives. Her talking heroic action, doesn't that just sound stupid in a woman's. Right, I forgot that this is a ghost. Doesn't it just sound stupid when she puts it in his he said it in one of the other things. He talked about heroic blah 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 blah, but we keep running into this Teddy Roosevelt style run, you can outrun bullets, or bullets can't hurt you if you just believe strong enough, World War One nonsense that was just proved wrong. So I don't know why she's bringing it back. If he's supposed to get everything that he got wrong in life right in death, how is he getting this so wrong? Continuing, for all of academia's separate precious journals, each specialized fields of knowledge overlap. They actually don't. There is very little academic cross pollination of information, very little, and it was getting bad in the 70s, and it has become crisis level today. These concepts splashed over into archaeology, history, biology, and tinged the arts and sciences alike. And it's actually interesting. I had a psychologist get really upset with me that I didn't want to talk to her about something that was outside her field, because I knew she didn't know anything about it, because she wasn't cross-educated. She hadn't gone to school for anything other than her field, and she really had only educated herself in the expertise of her position, and she just could not understand why I didn't want to talk to her about it. And the reason is Dunning-Kruger. Because she has an expert level knowledge in this one field, she's going to overestimate how little she knows in every other field. She's going to assume that she knows the same amount, or that she has the same level of cognitive capacity. That is, that she has the same ability to quickly learn what she doesn't know that she has in her field, in literally every single other possible field of knowledge. She doesn't. She only has the ability to learn in her field, because she's only learned how to learn in her field, because she's trained herself to learn in her field, because she's paid adults to train her how to learn in her field when she was still a child. So the concepts splashing over into archaeology, history, biology, and tinging the arts and sciences alike is actually untrue in academe. And William James Ghost is absolutely talking about academe, because in the previous sentence he said all of academe's separate journals, they do not communicate among one another. Absolutely, academe does not communicate across schools. They don't even communicate across hallways within schools. Colleges do not communicate at all. It's a serious, serious problem. I'm saying this hard this many times because it's a fucking problem. It's a real problem. And her just assuming that they do, because people who have a moderate interest in self-education after high school can pick up on any bookshelf, not on any bookshelf, from any store, books from every conceivable field of human knowledge, and read any 7 of them and think they're cross-pollinated and cross-educated across every field, or at least those 7 fields of human knowledge, and that they have the training and the cognitive capacity, cognitive stamina necessary to compare all of those things without meticulous note taking, without meticulous note showing. They're just wrong. Terrence Howard is what they are. They're just wrong. This is why you have to show your citations when you write a real paper. And this is why throughout William James' essay, when he's not just filling time, he's quoting someone else. Nor did the past escape, he continues. Great artists of previous centuries become isolated eccentrics, their genius produced by hormonal malfunction or sexual deficiency. Now, do you understand why I just talk about how people are horny? This is not true. This is not true. You don't become a great artist because you're horny. She's talking specifically about um, the Flowers lady. Why can't I? Georgia O'Keeffe. She's talking about Georgia O'Keeffe when she says there that artist's genius becomes produced by hormonal malfunction or sexual deficiency. She's talking about Sappho, and people genuinely believe today that there's something genetically wrong with the island of Sappho of Lesbos in Greece because they produced a woman who wrote erotic lesbian poetry before anybody else had thought to be gay as a woman in public in writing. So there must be something wrong with Lesbos for the last 200 2,500 years, because do you understand what I'm saying? How stupid that chain of logic is? It's so dumb. There's no sexual deficiency in poets. This is what I say. The women think that if they just go without getting laid, it's going to make their book fall out of their womb. And that's just not how it works. That's why Teresa of Avila was writing what she was writing. She was so fucking horny because she wouldn't just go out and get laid like all of the male Christians were doing, that she was having wet dreams about Jesus banging her in a crystal castle. It's amazing, but it's real. And history was rewritten to fix that hormonal and sexual deficiency. Do you see what I'm saying? When women are getting it and they're getting it on the reg, civilization is good. When men start giving it to each other, civilization falls apart. And when women start holding it hostage, civilization goes absolutely fucking bananas, bonkers, crazy town. It's hilarious. It's bad, but it's hilarious. We're just animals, man. We just want to do the sex. It's really funny. Anyway, history wasn't rewritten to fit this idea that there was some sexual deficiency among homosexuals, among homosexual women. Um, Women are horny, and if you isolate them from men, they're going to get it from someone, whether it's a dildo on the internet or they're lesbian. What did in her time in the 70s, what did they say? My roommate. This is my good friend and my roommate. I call her my sister, right? Does she think that just started in 76, like when she was in college was the first time a girl ever kissed a girl and liked it? Come on. Come on. Come on. Don't be dumb, James. If the animal struggle for dominance resulted in the survival of the fittest, which we now know it didn't. You will, Jen? I heard that. So will I. Call me a lesbian. Then surely man, as the most powerful victor of that sum, must emerge as the carrier of basic drives best suited to ensure the species continuance, which is really funny because the male actually does determine the gender of the child, but the female determines whether it's going to come out autistic and suicidal or not. The young democracy could lustily, it's almost like you need two to tango, Jane. It's almost like you can't think yourself pregnant. Women in the 70s thought they could think themselves pregnant. You know that, right? I was telling another Jen, maybe the same Jen, on Twitter about how between about 800 AD, maybe about 750 AD, and about the 1300s AD, women were dropping out of civilization en masse to join monasteries because they thought that they would get magically pregnant with Jesus. They thought they would get virgin pregnant with Jesus if they joined monasteries. Y'all women are hilarious. The young democracy could thusly justify the unfortunate circumstances of a sometimes ruthless competition. It was each man for himself. No, it wasn't. Actually, it actually wasn't. The law of you don't know this. The way the colonies actually worked was really interesting. It started out that you had to be a member of the church. Virginia pregnant. Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know how it happened. I just thought about it real hard. Anyway, um, yeah. Oh, even virgin pregnant's real good too. Um, uh, you had to be a member of every community's church, and if you wanted to move communities during the colonial period before 1776, you actually had to have a religious, you had to have a verified, not just verifiable, but an actual verified religious experience that fit with the religious experiences of the community in your that you were moving to. So you literally had to have dreams, they had to be verified, and they had to be the same dreams that other people were having at that time. So moving towns was a huge problem. And the economy, the trade among the towns, the only way the trade among the towns worked was because of Jewish money connected the families back to Europe. It's really interesting. So what she says right here, the young democracy could thusly justify the unfortunate circumstances of a sometimes ruthless competition. No, it couldn't. It had to be wildly cooperative, or they would have all died. It was each man for himself. No, it wasn't. If each man had been for himself, they would have died. They would have all died. And if it weren't for the Jewish money connecting them back to the continent, they wouldn't have been able to get loans to buy the things that England wouldn't provide to them. They would have all died. It would have been exactly like is it Roanoke? It would have been exactly like that. The colony, the first colony that disappeared. It was in North Carolina. I should know the name. I think it was Roanoke. Yet in such a world, there would be no order at all. Well, in a dog eat dog, every man for himself world, is there no order? Isn't the order just whoever's top dog, whoever has the biggest gun or the most sets of guns, and doesn't the order self-select based around not getting killed by that guy? Isn't crime the order that she's talking about? Not the order, but the world that she's talking about? Sorry, I got people texting me. I've been going for almost 3 hours, just long enough that my friends are getting anxious for me to switch topics. That's really funny. It is beautiful having friends. Just uh I'm 3 paragraphs away from being done. But I do want to tell you that as a person who's never had them before, and if you're out there in the future or you're listening to me now, I know it's just me and Jen. I assume it's just me and Jen now. It's probably me and Kerm. The point is, having never had friends my whole life, having had girlfriends who hated my fucking guts and did everything they could to change my personality through abuse, it's really cool having friends who are just like, all right, I'm bored with what you're doing, but I know you're going to be doing something in an hour and 7 minutes, so I'll just meet up with you at that next thing, because this is my job. All of my friends have always been disrespectful when I invite them to come hang out with me at my restaurant jobs. They've always been disrespectful. I never wanted to make money off them. I don't need you to tip me. I understand that my friends want to, and my friends have to be the last, because if I rely on my friends, that's just cult. It's just cult. I'm just grifting off the people who love me the most, and that's not fair. But it is cool having friends because, like, yeah, I've been going for 3 hours. Yeah, I'm not always interesting. Yeah, I work better on your own time when you can pause me, when you come in and out of your attention, you can back up all of those things. I don't work for a live medium. That's fun. It's really cool. I get to see. Yeah, and Jen's telling me that she's here and she's never trying to change people, but at the same time, I'm not asking you to maliciously or even manipulatively change me. I'm just saying it's really cool. Oh, you don't need to, Jen. Jen just said that she wouldn't want someone to show up at her public performance and then bounce when they got bored because the public performance was 75% for her. You also wouldn't do a 75% for you per public performance, Jen. If you were going to do a public performance, you would be a smart person and you would sell tickets, and you would not morally, but you would intellectually obligate people to stay. And that's what I've been trying to get to, is incentive. I listened to Kerm and how do I want to put this? Anarchists argue about incentive, and I don't think either of them was wrong. And so there are incentives for the performer as well. Most performers aren't freelance. Like, think about your actors. They're paid before they act. They're not out there acting and then expecting to get paid based on the quality of the performance. Who would do that? Who would live the way I live? Nobody. It's insane. But it's the position that I've put myself in through other bad life choices. And it gives me an opportunity to be performatively virtuous in a way that doesn't make you think that you lack virtue, or rather isn't intended to indicate that you lack virtue. That's what it's really about. And so let's see if she's going to talk about that, because we keep every time I break in to just talk about me, Jane has the opposite to say about herself, which does make me feel good about myself. She starts this paragraph literally starts on an EM dash. I have never seen anybody start a paragraph on an EM dash before. It goes period, paragraph, EM dash, word. I've never seen anybody that schizophrenic in my entire life. The results of all this were mixed. Freud painted such a dire picture of man's subconscious and limited salvation to such a small number of people. No, no, he didn't. That spontaneity was not fostered, but instead diminished and constructed to competitive fields where it was condoned. No, he didn't. Salvation. Okay, what Freud didn't do was take away your ability to go to church. All Freud did was say, here, maybe take a mood altering drug, maybe smoke a cigarette, maybe jerk one out, maybe don't fuck your mom. Like, if fucking your mom is the only route to salvation, there is no we're done. There is no salvation for us. That's what she just said, though. She just said that by pointing out the Oedipal complex and the Electra complex, which is the female's desire to fuck the father and kill the mother, um, by pointing them out, he took away people's salvation, is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Because you have to kill your same-sex parent, that removes the ability for spontaneity? How does that make sense? Do anything but that would be spontaneous. The spontaneous self, the impulsive portion of man's nature, became most suspect, for in this spontaneous acts, man could unwittingly reveal not a basic goodness, but the hidden shoddiness of his motives. She's talking about Freudian slips. That's all she's talking about. She's talking about the euphemistic Freudian slip. And what she's talking about, okay, I'm not allowed to say this. Is she the kind of person that Freudian slips a lot because she's just really stupid and she lacks the guile necessary to not say her lies out loud? Is that really what it is? Is she that person? Is she that person that when she walks into rooms and somebody says a good idea, she goes, "I've got an idea," and then repeats it verbatim? Is she that person? I don't know. I've not watched enough of her live, and I've definitely not watched her in group behavior. But does anybody else get the feeling that that's what's happening here? Is she's that person, and she's saying that she's allowed to be that person, even though people fucking hate her for it? Because that's what that sentence reads like. The spontaneous self, the impulsive portion of man's nature, became suspect. The only way that's true, I can think of two stories, and one of them is a Jung story. So if she's trying to occult that she means Jung by this, she's talking about how Jung would talk about the secret stress in people's lives and it would get them uncomfortable, kind of like how when I'm just kind of talking and then the women in my audience go, "Oh God, he's talking about me and I have to change everything about my personality, or I'm never going to get a husband and my feet are always going to hurt." No, I'm not doing that. Also, Freud didn't really do that. That's not real. I do that a lot, but Freud didn't really. No, Jung didn't really do that because he's only got one example of it in his books, and it's not in any of his public performances. And Jung definitely didn't because Freud did. And the only other thing like that that's associated with Freud is Freudian slips, where if you like go to say, "Oh, I wanted to put that coke in my mouth," but you accidentally say cock. "Oh, I put that cock in my mouth," that it actually has deeper meaning. And what she's saying is, "Oh, because of him, you can't even make mistakes without there being a deeper meaning." And no, sweetheart. Freud was not the first person to make fun of you for deeper meaning. Freud was the first person to try his best to take you seriously for doing it a lot. Like, if you come into his office and 5 times in a row you say cock by accident, yeah, you're thinking about his dick. You're just thinking about how you're in the same room with a person with a cock. And that's fine, but there's a pattern there. And Freud, just like all of us, had pattern recognition abilities and had honed them to whatever degree he had honed them. And what he didn't do was take away your ability to make mistakes and be spontaneous. Nobody did. There's this pathological fear, this terror that men are going to take away women's ability to be spontaneous. And it's like, no, sweetheart, that's called kindergarten. Everybody went through it. Everybody went through it. If you didn't go through it, your parents loved you more than mine did. I don't want to unpack that because if her parents loved her more than mine did, that could explain why she came out so unself-critical. And then there's a moral judgment that goes on top of that where the question that's begged is, do I think that your parents have to hate and beat you in order for you to come out a quality person? And that's what people used to believe in 1977. It's wrong. The spontaneous self, oh, I completely forgot this was supposed to be in William James' voice. The spontaneous self, William James says. The impulsive portion, yep. The search for virtue itself became the grossest kind of moral posturing. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, we're still there. We're still at the virtue signaling thing. So 77, yeah, that's never going away. The robber baron at least was honest in his dishonesty, or so the feeling went. No, he wasn't, and no, I don't think anybody has ever felt that way about the baron, the robber barons, the train tycoons. I don't think anybody ever felt good about. I don't think anybody has ever thought that the real estate magnates were honestly lying to you. Compassion and sympathy not only went out of style, their expression was considered evidence of duplicity and a sanguine denial of man's nature. One species could not climb over another while feeling sympathy for its predecessor, nor could the members of any species afford pity for their less vigorous fellows. And that's the end of that chapter. I'm at hour 3. I've promised to do a space in 57 minutes. I'm not just going to cut this off and not say goodbye. That's the only time she's taken a break after saying something good. That's the only time she's ended on an ending. Because that latter part happened. She's not wrong about that. She's trying to defend a lot of the people that are at the wealth bracket of these tycoons that she's supposed to be nominally criticizing, but that did happen. After Darwin, the elite class used natural selection and evolution and to justify a particular kind of callousness, a particular kind of, well, they'll evolve out of it, or even as recently as 2016, we had a serious problem where European and Asian educated doctors were trained that non-European people felt less pain. And so, like, they would give less anesthetic and less painkiller and just less help in general for non-whites. And that was as recent as 2016. And so she's actually not wrong that the medical industry after the 70s made a lot of mistakes. And so if we're giving her the benefit of the doubt and we're taking her seriously as somebody who was injured by
a clinician or a series of clinicians, male clinicians, especially because females wouldn't have been allowed to practice at the same degree in the 70s and before. I mean, we're talking about in the 18 and 1900s, women just wouldn't have been allowed to practice in that way. And then we know that the 50s and the 60s are the what I call the decades of mommy's little helper. I mean, Valium is the only reason the elite and the upper middle class survived the 50s and the 60s. And so that didn't go anywhere in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I knew a mom in COVID who was just fucking elated to finally be eligible for her mommy's little helper. So psychology got a lot of wrong, especially as regards women. All of our studies about menstruation and the effect of hormones on the actual lived experience, the actual perceptual experience, they were all garbage until we had fMRI. And I don't think fMRI was ubiquitous or even available before 2015. Just forget knowing anything. And then like you can go back. You can go back and you can look at these studies, the effect of menstruation on the brain, and then you can look at the participants and there will be 0% females. How did you? And then you read the paper and it's husbands reporting moments with their wives. And it's like, this is not a study. This is nothing. This is this isn't even good hearsay. This isn't even good stand-up comedy. This is just garbage. And that, to Kerm's point, is why learning and why doing the research aren't a job. Doing the research is not the job. If you're that's why interns don't get paid. Interns don't get paid because 95% of what an intern's going to do is shit that I have to do over better and not have and take and like redo without coffee stains, without boogers all over it. And I don't mean to be a dickhead. I managed teenagers for 20 years and I'll just try to get your fucking body odor not on the people's food. Like just try that. Try to sweep without somehow breaking the fucking mop. How did you or sweep without breaking the fucking broom? How did you break another broom? How are you breaking brooms? I'm watching you sweep. How are you breaking it? These things happen. And so this idea that like age is just a number is fucking, I'm sorry. It's stupid. Like the difference in a 37-year-old me and a 50-year-old, it's real. There's a reason that once you hit about 40, it's impossible to take anybody that doesn't have that 4 in that digit. And it's seriously, I get it. This is the very reason we identify and we organize ourselves generationally. That 15 years matters a lot. It used to be 30 years. You would recognize it used to be a lot, even 300 years. You would recognize everybody around you and the way they were talking and the way they were behaving. But man, it's so much faster now because more people have access to the language. It's not just speaking it. Because, Tax, if you're in the audience in the future, I love you. I'm not criticizing you, but I am talking to you. He also goes by Rumi in the group chat. We don't know what slang was like before people like me started writing it down. Before movies, we just don't know. We can't know. Nobody wrote in the vernacular. So you don't know what the vernacular was like. So you get this sense that, oh, well, vernacular languages are bad. Well, why do you get the sense that vernacular languages are bad? Because the vernacular language decays, changes the scriptural language. And what's the scriptural language? Well, the scriptural language isn't the dictionaries. It's your 10 commandments. It's not the thesauri. It's not your codices. It's not your educational material on how to speak the language for your children. Your children are still going to pronounce the words in the same way. They're still going to read the same sentences you are. A verb, a noun, an adjective, an adverb. All of these things are still the same. They are. Fundamentally, a comma is still a comma.
And fundamentally, ever since fucking Charlemagne's war over the horses, no one has even known how to use the comma. They invented it and then they didn't give us good rules. So people, even now, people who think they're good writers, people who are paid and royalties and advances, use commas as like seasoning. Like just like, no, that sentence doesn't look like it has enough commas. Like, put them in there somewhere. And that's, I find that highly annoying is why I'm talking about it. If you do that, I find you highly annoying, and I will personally help you work on how to fix it, because if I find it annoying, I want to be involved. I don't want to just tell you, you fucking suck, get out of my life. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's no ghost here. Like, I don't think we need to suspend judgment that Jane is channeling a ghost. Jane is not channeling a ghost. There's no ghost. There's no William James. This is just Jane saying dumb shit in a half awake state that sometimes it takes her multiple days to meditate on. That's a bad sign. It's a bad sign that it can take me so many weeks to sit down and even bother to work on mine. But once you see how many words I actually have in it, you'll probably understand. Okay. I no longer remember what that was about, which was the goal there at the end. I wanted to just flush my brain of all of that. I feel like what I need to do, I feel like I need to do like a song or like a chant, or like I need to get up and do like a hoogity boogity dance or something at the end of these to tell you that I'm okay, because they all end with me so mad. Mad. I just want to rage quit. Like, all right, thank you for showing up. Get the fuck out. Bam, and be done. And that's just completely unsustainable. Uh So maybe you can help me brainstorm that. I am going to take a half hour. I've got a sandwich here. I'm gonna get a Mountain Dew. I'm gonna drink on that. I'm gonna do my breathing exercises without doing the silence portion of the podcast, because Swole didn't tell me whether he liked it or not. So you know what, Swole, I love you, buddy, but fuck you a little bit. And I'm gonna move over to Twitter, and we're gonna just do an open group space, since I can't get your voices here for the real-time feedback. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kerm, for the commentary. You do really help guide me when you can feel that I'm losing my way. I really appreciate that you guys have learned me well enough to notice. Um, I'm not in as weird a place. I've walked myself down. Um, if you listen to yesterday's meditation part, I was pretty fucked up. So I feel I'm good. I'm gonna take 30 minutes, get something to eat, um, and then we're gonna go live on Twitter, and I'm gonna see if I can't get a conversation going about post and transhumanism. Not only because I don't think people understand what those are, but because I want to see how many of these people that talk about the universe as a simulation, or we're going to have robot bodies in 50 years, or we need to evolve to the next step. I want to see how higher thought expresses itself among the people that I love, so that they know that when I go, oh, that's higher thought's evil, I'm not saying you're evil, because I think you're in the right cult, and it's not mine because I don't have a cult. Thank you guys for showing up. Thank you for filtering in and out. Thank you for clicking in, future audience. That's really cool of you. Um, I don't have anything else to sell you today. You know about the Patreon. You know about the Twitter. You know that I'm on Cash App. If you've got $1, $2, you just want to throw my way and say, hey, financial rewards are the rewards that people believe make people chase after the things they want. Thank you for the thank you, Jen. It's genuinely my pleasure. I love this. If I weren't doing this, I would have hurt myself um, a long time ago. So thank you for the opportunity, because it is an opportunity to do this in front of the two of you. There have been I had as many as 7 people. That's huge for me. You know, the last time I talked to 7 people, I don't. Fuck, 5 or 6 years ago.
So this is huge for me. Like just as a social experiment and learning to grow as a person. I keep calling it perseverance through adversity, but it's really that personal growth through the perseverance and adversity that I want to focus on. My good friends, they keep telling me like, "Oh man, you're so different, you're so different." And it's not anymore. It's not because I was going through the random uh switchboard of ego death of trying to figure out which combination of on off switches of personality is going to make me a person that people will like. I'm just allowed to be me for 2 weeks in a row. And it's pretty cool. So thank you for letting me be me for so long. Thank you for like thanks for checking back, man. I took 4 days off. You could have said, nah, he's never coming back. And that's cool of you. And thank you for giving me 4 days off. I won't I won't take 4 days off after this one. I'll talk to you tomorrow night. We're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna get better at scheduling these and sticking to it, even if I find it inconvenient. That's a job. Thanks, guys. Oh man, I clicked the button right then, and now it's not gonna work.